G'day, Fyreslayers, AOS coach here, and that actually wasn't a very good start. I was going to have some mad little intro, but we are talking Fyreslayers. There is a new war scroll which has triggered this conversation. So we are recording General's Handbook 2023. We have a new war scroll when it comes to the Grimwrath Exile or Grimhold Exile. But I've got Kevin Lathers here, the Molten Infernoth himself, with his mount, the Momo. So we might get a little bit of Cato in the stream. Always love a good animal companion. But we are talking the new Fyreslayers. And when I say new, I mean, how does it stack up in the current General's Handbook, and how does it go with all the new war scrolls and any points changes? And there's been a couple of things that are at least worth revisiting discussion. Is it like the old General's Handbook and we just rinse and repeating lists? Is it a complete rebuild because there's been a massive nerf? I don't know, but Kev's going to tell me. So g'day, welcome, Kevin. Australia, by the way, shortens everything. So Kevin has now become Kev. And you're going to help me unpack this Fyreslayers and what does the world look like for
I'll try.
the Bernie boys?
I think they're in an okay spot. I was kind of upset about the point nerfs, but it's not really affected anything too greatly. So the hardest part's been the new tactics for Fyreslayers. So overall, they're in a good spot, I think.
So for anyone who doesn't know who you are, where are you from, and how long have you been playing Fyreslayers for? Why'd you even get into them?
So I started playing Fyreslayers like right at the start of 3.0. And I'm from Georgia. I'm in the Georgia Warbands, it's my club. And the local meta has a lot of Fyreslayer players, oddly. Like, we have a lot of people who play Fyreslayers. And I got into them just because I've always kind of been a fan of dwarves. And I was like, okay, I want KO, I want Fyreslayers. I'll just get both and see which ones I like playing more. And then the first time I had to roll on all the Thunderers shooting profiles, I was like, never mind, not this one. So we're going to play Fyreslayers. So that's basically it.
They're a neat little army, and I really like seeing, because like for a long time I saw them being introduced and they were super boring. But it's great to see that they've been adding more and more models to the range, whether it's the Flame Bearer guy, whether it's the Exile. They keep adding to the range, which is super neat, and I hope they keep building it out because it is an interesting faction. But to your point, even though you have a large representation in Georgia, I reckon you're probably carrying the flag for Fyreslayers, because even at majority of tournaments, there's not a lot of Fyreslayers, and I feel like it's a bit of a shame. I think they're definitely a interesting army. I think that they compete well, and hopefully this conversation inspires a few people to either go pick it up or to maybe dust off the dirt and, well, not dirt, the dust, get the dust off and put them back on the table.
Yeah, I don't see many other Fyreslayers players, and like even in your own like Discord, I chat with people, and it's kind of the same names you'll see over and over again. So every once in a while, it's people. I think Magmadroths pull people in more than anything. So
yeah, I think definitely the Magmadroth build, when Magmadroths were at their peak, you definitely saw more Fyreslayers kind of come into the mix, and you'd go to a tournament and you'd almost likely having to build like, how do I handle 3 Magmadroths or 4 Magmadroths and deal with the acidic blood that would like do mortal wounds? So how do I, like, that was actually at some point in time actually something you have to really worry about. Now it's Slanesh, it's Khorne, it's Soulblight, it's Ossiarch Bone Reapers, it's Seraphon. Not a lot of people are thinking about Fyreslayers, which might work in your favor.
And it does. Often I get opponents, and I ask my opponent, I'll be like, do you need me to explain like how my army works? Because you probably don't play it a lot. And most of them are like, yeah, I've never played Fyreslayers. Or what's odd is I've had some people who ask, and they'll be like, yeah, you don't have to explain it. I'm like, have you played a lot of Fyreslayers? They're like, no. And I'm like, okay. And then like they get surprised when like the 300 once per game abilities happen, and they're like, wait a second, what? You have this? And it's like, yeah. So
it's such an awesome little synergistic army, and you've got to really understand it. So how are you feeling about them in the current General's Handbook? So it's 2023. We are Antorian Wizardy, Hoarfrosting, Merciless Blizzarding, Nullstone Adornments. All the battle plans are super different. How are you feeling right now in the current season? And are Fyreslayers in a good spot, a bad spot, or they're kind of what they were doing last year?
I think they're in a slightly worse spot than they were maybe at like around like early turn of the year. But they're probably in a better spot than they were like when the book first released, and they're not in a bad spot, certainly. Like if you put in like some reps and get used to it, you can win games. I think one of the things is that the most forgiving build for Fyreslayers is the Magmadroth build, because of the high movement and the like lava blood and stuff. And that maybe isn't the best build in the meta right now. So a lot of people who want to get into Fyreslayers, they jump on that build first, and it seems forgiving on the surface, and then they lose a bunch of games and they just kind of lose interest in the army. Or they don't want to play, swarms of Volkites, which is a whole other thing. So,
yeah, and I think that's probably one of the barriers, right? It's like you either run you run a bunch of Magmadroths, or you run the Horde, and there's kind of no middle ground, which is a little unfortunate. Yeah, you've got a couple of little heroes you can do here and there, but it feels like one or the other, which, again, I kind of hope they'll bring out more models and bring some diversity to the range, as they're doing with, orcs and other kits. But tell me about, like, the current season, right? Because I feel like this would actually work in your favor. Like, yeah, you don't have a lot of wizards, but you're also not dealing with bounty hunters. You are probably last season in the Galatian champion. That probably helped you a lot, especially because you don't have a lot of named heroes. You were often having little heroes hugging your troops anyway. So I guess you went from the lows of bounty hunters to the peaks of Galatian champions to maybe a slight dip. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and like bounty hunter season actually wasn't that bad, because towards the end of it, especially, most people weren't even running bounty hunters. Like, most people just went back to battle reg. And also, like, you do so much damage dying that, like, you could usually shred a unit. So it wasn't that bad. This is definitely worse than last season, mostly because we lost the Galatian veteran, like, fight through line. So usually, instead of getting your full 10-man Volkites or 20-man Volkites, you're getting, like, between 7 and 9 Volkites in, depending on the size of the unit you're attacking. So you've lost, that 10 to 30% of your DPS. That's probably the hardest hit of the season, more than points or anything, is the loss of that regiment. So
yeah, that last 6 months probably played into your strengths, because a lot of armies don't have those small heroes that want to fight, but you're, especially in the non-Magmadroth build, when you're running your Hearthguard or your Volkites, they are traditionally running in blocks and power pairs, and it almost feels like we've moved, the same list can kind of work currently. It's just that you don't have the wizards. And I'm really curious to hear from you as we get into, like, the discussion. Like, how are you feeling, like, given the fact that you've got no native wizards? People are running Hulkamania with Blizzard and Hoarfrost and even Rupture, and you don't really have the tools to go out and, you can, like, there's certain things you can do, but you don't get to play in that space, just despite having a lot of armies of, like, 9 wounds or less.
Yeah, so far I've been enjoying primal dice, although it sometimes feels a little bad when it's like how my random dice versus your random dice. But overall, it feels almost a little more powerful to have the unbind with primal than the casting, because you don't have to worry about primal unbind. It's only primal casting. So once your opponent rolls even 1/1, it's like they usually are done. They're like, I'm done. I'm not stop rolling anymore. And then you can just be like, yeah, I'm throwing all my primal dice into this unbind. And with the new hand-carved icon, I find that's really nice. Plus, Fyreslayers have 2 artifacts, the Nullstone icon, which you can ignore offensive spells at a 4-up, and then the Ash Cloud Rune, which is once per game. You can basically any unit wholly within 12 of that priest is not visible for the purpose of spellcasting. And that spell is extremely powerful when you know your opponent's lining up for some sort of blizzard or some sort of, like, big spell casting turn, and you're just like, yeah, you can't see any of my units this turn. And you can see, like, if you do that to the Starborn or, like, a Lumineth player at the right time, you can just completely nuke their damage. So because people are relying on that blizzard, when you take that away, some of their strategy falls apart. So,
and it's interesting because you do have certain look, there's obviously a lot of spells that people want to get off anyway, right? So that hasn't changed between last season and this season, but now we've got a couple of extra spells. You've got a couple of extra tools that you go, right, this person has Blizzard. They're obviously trying to set up for Blizzard. So I need to make sure that I'm aware of using my power dice or my primal magic dice appropriately. And we'll get to this all in a minute. We'll bring up the rules and I'll get to unpack it. But what I'm hearing generally, and I'm quickly, like while you were chatting, bringing up what Games Workshop said was the win percentage, because I'm curious to see what Fyreslayers, what GW said. I know obviously you've got TSN and you've got Rowhammer.
Everyone has their own stat.
Everyone has their own stats and how they cut up the meta watch. But I was curious, like, because you don't see a lot of Fyreslayers at tournaments, so their win percentage is either really good because the people who are committed to it are excellent, or you've. Hi, how are you going actually? Fyreslayers in the middle of the pack, like you're at the 48% mark. You're in 48%, so you have dropped a little bit according to the Games Workshop stats, but you are kind of in that fat middle that they want. You know, that between that 55 and 45% win rate.
And I feel like some of that's just that the top armies are so much harder to deal with, even for anyone, but even for Fyreslayers, like not especially Soulblight, but OBR is very difficult to deal with. That like. That's probably dragging the win rate down more than anything. And then Slaanesh too, because it's like you're going to inevitably play those armies, and because there's so many people running them and they're hard to deal with. So that kind of knocks the win rate. Like if those armies were brought down a little bit, I think Fyreslayers win rate would probably go up a little bit. So
yeah, because like I'm looking at the win rate according to GW, right? So you got your Soulblight Gravelords, and the two strong builds at the moment or around this time was either Ethereal Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, where something like Merciless Blizzard is something that you really need to cut through those 14 or 16 wounds on the Vloster. Or you're seeing the zombie spam, which is a lot of zombies, the corpse cart, but you don't have the tools to go out and get that corpse cart to shut it, kind of that little piece down. You've obviously got Slaanesh, which has the Pretenders list that has, you know, the one hero that can issue the command 3 times, which makes Bliss Barbs incredibly tough. So you're right. Like when you start looking at, you know, even Ossiarch Bone Reapers and how do you start shutting these down, Fyreslayers don't have all of the tools. So I'll be curious, because I know you've recently gone 4-1. I know there's been a couple of other 4-1s at major tournaments this season. So I'll be curious to unpack with you how you kind of got to that point and the considerations.
Yeah, and the big consideration is Fyreslayers are a toolbox army. So you can make a list that can deal with Soulblight. You can make a list that can deal with Slaanesh, but they might not deal with the other army. So maybe this list I make crushes Slaanesh, but then I get only OBR. And it's like, well, okay, I guess I lose. So like that's kind of the thing with the Fyreslayers is you have to, it's hard to make the all-comers list, and that's usually why you see the lists you do is somebody trying to make the all-comers list. So
yeah, you either got to lean into your strength, or you need to bring a utility army and accept that you may not use certain tools and you may not get in the positions that you get to leverage. So do you lean into your strengths and just do what you do and hope for the best? I guess it's up to you and how people kind of want to build. But while we're talking GW, I know you and I were talking off stream about one of the other changes. Actually, there's probably two impactful changes that's happened recently. There's been the Lookout Sir change, which probably works in your favor, given that most of your heroes aren't unique. The other one being that Fyreslayers had a points increase. So you'll see the Auric Runesmiter went up 10 points to be 130. Hearthguard Berserkers are now 160, going up 10 points. Your 3 Invocations, your Molten Infernoth, the Runic Firewall, and the Flamespitter all went up 10 or 20 points respectively. So they're sitting around the 50 to 60 mark. So given the points changes and given that you're kind of sitting at the 45% win rate according to GW, how did the points changes and the Lookout Sir rule kind of work in your favor, or how has it kind of impacted your list building and performance?
Well, I think the Lookout Sir, it's obviously a huge buff for Fyreslayers overall, although it feels like a nerf after the previous seasons, because there were funny things in the previous season where like you're not allowed to shoot a unit that was within 3 of, infantry, and it didn't have a range limit. So you could do things like run your Volkites right up to the edge of the opponent and then charge in like a Grimwrath. And it's like, no, he's within 3. You're not allowed to target him with shooting attacks for Unleash Hell, like those kind of silly things. You can't do that anymore, but it feels nice not to be like, oh, turn 1, I've shot up, all my Flamekeepers are dead or whatever. So it's overall been a big buff. The points changes have been pretty rough, though, because for most Fyreslayers lists, you're looking at minimum 30-point increase, typically 40 to 50-point increase. I have one list that went up 60 points, and it doesn't seem like a ton, but when you realize you're already at like 1980, 2000, that means one unit has to be downgraded or taken out. And then what do you fill it with and that kind of thing. So that actually hit my list building harder than anything because I had to rework a lot of lists. Like I had a very good list I really liked, like a control style Lofnir list that just doesn't work as well now because I had to pull stuff out of it. So
where did you find the most impact? Is it the fact that your Hearthguards went up 10 points? So when you start adding multiple units or reinforcing, is that where you kind of saw the points really impacting your list? Or
not
are you
typically
someone that's taking all 3 invocations? Are you running a bunch of rune smiters? Like where has the change been for you mostly?
The most typical change issue is that almost all Fyreslayers lists use a rune smiter, so that's 10 points, and almost all use at least one of the invocations, typically the Firewall or Infernoth, so that's 20 or 30, but sometimes both. So if you take 2 invocations, rune smiter, that's 40 points. I'm not somebody who really loves Hearthguard Berserkers. I mean, I like them, I use them, but a lot of my lists don't employ them at all. And because of that, like that change did very little to affect my list. And if I do use them, I usually use one block of 10 or 15. So that's, 20 or 30 points, which when you've already gone up 40, it's just the same unit you were taking off is already happening. So like it wasn't typically what happens is like I have some lists that were 3 invocation lists. Now they're 2 invocation lists. Or I took out like one Volkite unit and subbed in like a Grimwrath Berserker because that's the 50-point difference. So.
I was going to ask you how you mitigated that. Was it the fact that you would drop a unit or you'd run one less invocation? Is it a unit gets downgraded? Is it one champion that kind of gets removed? So, yeah. I mean, invocations are probably the easy one, but it also ties to your grand strategy, which I imagine you want as many as possible.
Exactly. And it's hard to decide. And each list, since there are like 3 to 4 like archetype Fyreslayers lists that are kind of popularly played and all pretty good, like it depends on which one of those you're running to what you do to like fix the point change basically in your list. Greyfyrd, Vostarg, Lofnir all have lists that you can run. So which one of those you run is going to impact what you did after the point changes. So
perfect segue, because now I want to get under the hood to say, how do we think about Fyreslayers in the current edition? And you obviously got your 4 lodges. We've seen different waves of, Lofnir was popular for a while when we were running, the monster truck magma droths. Then we've kind of gone through different versions, normally Vostarg or Greyfyrd. I don't really see a lot of Hemdar. It's never really something that I see often.
It's maybe very bad.
Yeah, like I don't recall ever really seeing it on the table. But in current like General's Handbook 2023, how are you thinking about your allegiance, whether it's at the lodge point of view, the fierce counterattack, the heroic action, or even your Grimwrath Oaths? Do any of these change or become more important or less important to you in the current season?
The only one, so the Grimwrath Oaths, they used to be on the warscroll. They took them off, put them on the BattleSmith. They're useful. Theoretically, with the Grimhold Exile, you don't need the most commonly used one for your Grimwrath Berserker, which is the Run and Charge Oath, which is, I believe it's, let's see, I will let nothing stand in my way. Yeah. But you still sometimes end up running it so you can separate your Grimwrath from your Grimhold. But the only one that you'll see used more, I would say, is the Fierce Counterattack. And that's because in previous seasons, I felt like I saw more monsters. And so relying on your Hearthguard Berserkers, which make the best use of Fierce Counterattack, was not something you really wanted to do because chances are you get roared. But now sometimes I'll go multiple games and I won't see a monster. Like, unless I'm fighting like ogres, or if they have a monster, they'll have like one monster and you're pigeonholing that one monster to trying to get in there and roaring those Hearthguard. So because of the monster ubiquity going away, you can see that some builds, like one of the popular build I saw that used Hearthguard, are now starting to come back into vogue because there's not as much worry about that. there are some things like an OBR that turn off command abilities in Tzeentch, but people don't run those that often, and they're not really like, if OBR is indie, you're probably getting lifted anyways, so the fierce counterattack's not saving you. So yeah, it's not otherwise. Yeah, it's become more popular.
What about your lodges? So what I'm hearing is there hasn't been a lot of changes in regards to how you think about Grimwrath. It's not like all of a sudden you need more Grimwrath Berserkers in your list because you're trying to handle some particular big bad, or, you know, it's. But what about your lodges? Are there current clear standouts? You know, are we back to Lofnir and running all our Magma Droths? Is there something within, you know, Greyfyrd that now is still good? Like how are you thinking about lodges? The top of the tree stuff.
We can just take out Hermdar. Hermdar is the worst lodge by a huge margin. Like, nobody should be or will be running it. As for the other three lodges, they all have something good. Lofnir is still a great lodge. It's just monsters kind of get picked apart by like OBR and Slaanesh, so you don't see Lofnir very much. With Greyfyrd and Vostarg are the two decision makers, because both run usually infantry heavy and hero heavy. The hard part is, do you want that buff that your Volkites give you? Or do you want the toolbox, basically? Because Greyfyrd, it's not about the one additional wound on your heroes is great, right? But you want those 2 additional artifacts. Those artifacts can be the difference between like a blizzard hitting your units or not hitting your units with an Ash Cloud Rune. So you have to be, do I want the tools that Greyfyrd offers or the damage that Vostarg offers? And that's the real decision maker. And I personally usually lean towards Vostarg in the current meta, but I had at NashCon, I ran a 2 Magma Droth Greyfyrd list just so I could get more artifacts, and it worked very well. Oh, thank you.
Shout out for the delivery driving drink.
Yeah, my wife just brought me a milkshake. Yeah. I guess they went and got ice cream. So yeah, and the NashCon list, it was 2 Magma Droths or Hearthguard, and the toolbox that Greyfyrd offered allowed me to take Ash Cloud and the Master Rune, and it allowed me to, or the Magnetized Rune, which is +2 charge. It allowed me to basically table my Lumineth opponent in round 2 because of all these tools I had on hand. He couldn't cast spells on me. My Magma Droth had +2 to charge, so I could deep strike it for a 7-inch charge, these kinds of things. So Greyfyrd has a place. It's just, what do you want out of the 2 lists?
So I want to just pause you on NashCon for a second. So one of the cool features of the NashCon tournament, so shout out to Dave and Anthony who run an incredible tournament, a really good tournament that people talk about a lot. One of the cool features is that you get to run 2 lists. So you can have 2 lists, and the requirement is that throughout the tournament, you've got to run both of them at least once. So you can't. Correct. So you've got to at least use one of them once, and you can run, you know, whatever. You kind of get the story here. But if you, upon reflection, going through the 5 games that you went through, if you only had one list, which one would you have taken based off performance? Was it the Vostarg or was it the Greyfyrd?
I still would have taken the Vostarg just because I think it's the more omni list. But the Greyfyrd list, I think, performed extremely well. I made a huge mistake using the Vostarg list in game 2 instead of my Greyfyrd list, and I think that lost me game 2. Also, my opponent was a great player. I think he just kind of outplayed me a bit, but like, I think I would have done much better with my other list. So I definitely think it had a place, but I think the Vostarg was more of it made tactics easier, and it was just overall much easier list to play, and it was much better against more armies. And it performed. It's also very good against like Soulblight, and obviously there were a lot of them there. So
yeah, so I guess the challenge is, do you want the +1 to hit and +1 to wound on the charge, or do you want to go the 2 extra artifacts? Obviously, one relies on you hitting the charge, which in some situations you're seeing, like Khorne, for example, is hitting a lot of charges right now. But alternatively, like a couple of extra artifacts, you've got a good range of artifacts, and then it allows you to go into like Command Entourage or Warlord to get an extra prayer. It allows you to still go Battle Regiment and have a couple of extra artifacts. So there's a really strong decision point, I guess.
Yeah, it's tough. And typically I just go double Warlord in both Vostarg and Greyfyrd, because 3 artifacts is great. Why not go 5? And like, Fyreslayers doesn't care who goes first. If they go first, great. If they go second, great. Like, as long as you deploy well, you'll be fine either way. So you don't need the lower drops. So
You literally took the words out of my mouth. I don't feel like you care about going one drop. You can definitely go as many battalions as you want, and I don't think a lot changes. Like, I've never been worried about a one drop Fyreslayer since like first edition, maybe. But even then, like they wanted to go bottom of first to hopefully go double turn 2. But
I played around with an Alpha Strike Fyreslayers list. And a permutation of that was the Greyfyrd list I took to NashCon. And the hilarious part of it is I made it to be an Alpha Strike list. And I would tell that to opponents, and they would just still give me the top of 1. So it's like, what's the point of Battle Reg when they were going to give me the top of 1 anyways? So, like, it's all right.
Yeah. And because you've got so many heroes and so many troops, you're really going double battle. Like, you can't do a single Battle Reg. It's very hard to do a single battle regiment for you and be one drop. A pure one drop.
Typically, a pure one drop you would see would be in Lofnir. You would do a Rune Father Droth, 2 heroes, like a Battlesmith and a Rune Master, and then you would do, all Rune Sons or Arc Hearthguard with Rune Sons in your unit line. So that's the only real one drop Fyreslayers you'll see is Lofnir.
Yeah, I think when you see that, it's usually 2 drops, at least I see. And then, like, if you're going 2 drops, why not just go, if you can't beat the 1 drops, which people are committing to, well, why not you go all the drops?
Yeah, if I'm 2, I might as well be 12. Like, it doesn't matter.
Correct. You might as well go for the extra artifacts, the extra prayers, or something else to benefit you. Before I get into the actual General's Handbook, one thing that I find, especially for Fyreslayers players, is the sequence order of using your runes and how you start activating. Now, obviously, there's enhance effects that you don't always get to choose when you get the enhance effects outside of a certain couple of units. But when you look at and build around your Urgold, do you have like a process? Do you have particular runes that you activate at certain times or certain situations? Like, how do I make the most of this particular resource? Because it is do or die.
I feel, well, firstly, I'll go over like the biggest mistake I see most newer Fyreslayers make is, while there is a place for it, activating the Rune of Relentless Zeal, which is the additional movement rune on turn 1. Because you feel like, oh, I've got the top of 1 typically. I want to get in there and like get my stuff in position, but like it's not counting. One of the things with Fyreslayers runes, you have to be like, what am I doing on turn 2, 3, 4? So if my opponent gets into me on turn 1 or 2, I've only got the movement rune up. I don't have my other buffs, which I would want. So that's a big mistake. Now, if they give you like the bottom of 1 and you see like openings for Magma Droths or something, then it's fine. But so that's a mistake I see a lot of Fyreslayers make. Now, typically, you want to activate the rune that you will get the most out of not only in the turn you're in, but the turn you will be in, what your opponent will do. So if my opponent doubles me, which rune would I want up if they're going to double me? So like on turn 1, maybe that's the +1 to hit rune, because then if I activate my counter strike, I can't give them all out attack because I've issued that command. But now they've got +1 to hit natively. Or maybe it's the Mortal Wound rune, which is the the Searing Heat, because I'm dropping Auric Hearthguard on round 1, and I'm going to be, shooting with them and doing mortal wounds. And then if I'm charged and I unleash hell, I'm also doing mortal wounds on the charge. So your runes you activate are really going to center around not what you want to do necessarily in that turn, although that's good to consider, but also what you are going to do in the next turn and the turn after that. And so there's no real set layout. It's all very situational. And I always encourage like newer Fyreslayers players to don't have like, oh, round 1 I'm doing this, round 2 I'm doing this. Make sure you look at what's the board state is and think about what rune you're going to want to do. So that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably one thing that I would call out here as well is the Rune of Fiery Determination, which I think in the current season, while Kevin just quickly closes the door, one of the cool things that you can do now, especially we talked earlier about Merciless Blizzard, if you're concerned or if you're starting to see your opponent can, for example, you're a Gits player like I am, or you're seeing a player like Skaven who has the ability to teleport an Antorian Locus. So if you have like the ability, your opponent has the ability to teleport an Antorian Locus, and you know they're going to alpha strike you with Blizzard, you can go, right, well, I'm seeing that, I'm going for the 5+ ward. maybe if I'm lucky, I can get the enhance effect for the 6-up ward or the 5-up ward. That might help you. Blizzard is still a high risk spell, but that might be something that you want to consider. When is your opponent going to try to throw Blizzard at me, and keeping that ward up your sleeve?
Yeah, and a typical thing I do is actually the Rune of Fire Determination. I find I usually end up using later in the game after opponents finally got around to burning down my Battlesmith. Instead, I'll usually try to position such that my Battlesmith isn't within Blizzard range himself, but my other units are in range of the Battlesmith. So I have that 6-up or 5-up ward, and then I also have my 4-up Spell Ignore. And it's like, do you want to teleport your wizard in and roll that 50%? Roll the chance you get the Blizzard. And then you're rolling the chance that it gets through the 4-up Ignore. Then I got a ward. So you're making these chances, and if I get to go next, your wizard's dead. So these are the considerations. So.
I think outside of Gitz and Skaven, most people would say no. But when I can teleport a web spinner shaman for 65 points, that's a trade I'm willing to make. And even Skaven with the Grey Seer, there's probably a trade that you're willing to make. But yeah, you're right. Most armies who's paying over 100 points, 100 to 150 points somewhere, is not going to do that. Unless they feel like their back's against the wall and this is the only way to win the game, which you're in a good spot. If that's what they think, they're going to throw away 150 points of their tools to hopefully do Blizzard, and then hopefully not roll a 1, and then trigger potentially a massive blow up.
Yeah, and I had an opponent, one of my friends the other day was playing Seraphim, and he was in that position, and he teleported a wizard. Because the Seraphim has the hero phase teleport, and he had to roll the dice, and he rolled an obscene amount of mortal wounds. So you shouldn't have rolled those yet. Let's see. And I rolled the 4-up Spell Ignore, and it did nothing. And he was pretty salty about that. But that's the kind of, you're pulling the trigger on that against Fyreslayers. And another thing is if you can see your opponent setting up for that sometimes, depending on which opponent it is. If you have an Ash Cloud Rune, you can say at the start of the hero phase, if it's the start of the hero phase teleport, which would be, I think Seraphim do. But even if it's just a hero phase, if they're setting up for that, you can be you can't see my units, and now your strategy you were kind of setting up for has been nuked here. So
and they might have even picked one of they might have picked, is it Magical Dominance, where you've got to kill a unit with spells. So that becomes even more risky, and you put your primal magic dice into stopping the teleport as opposed to the Blizzard. You're like, cool, well, I'm going to shut you down the teleport, and then you can't do what you wanted to do anyway, and you may have been impacted negatively with your battle tactic.
Yeah, and another thing about the primal dice that's nice is you see what they've used primal dice on before you have to roll your unbind. So if it's a 2-spell combo, a teleport spell, and then the Blizzard, you just look for one of those spells not having all their primal dice or all their good roll. You rolled a 5 on that teleport. I'm going to unbind that. You have to put primal dice into this. But now you don't have primal dice for your Blizzard, and you have to hit a 12. So if let's say they even get 12 on dots, I've got 2 primal dice or 3 primal dice because I didn't have to use it to cast spells. Boom, throw them all in there. Let's see what happens. So it becomes super risky for my opponents to for Fyreslayer opponents in general to rely heavily on that. So
and I think as a Fyreslayer player, I'm imagining myself in the shoes when I play Stormcast or Daughters of Cain, where I don't have a lot of wizards and I have a lot of priests and things in my army. You've got to let certain spells go through. If you come up against an army with a lot of spell casts, you've just got to accept the fact that you're not going to challenge certain spells. There's some buffs that you want to get rid of. You don't want Daughters of Cain with Mind Razor. You don't want certain factions to have certain spells. But sometimes you have to let them go through so that you keep those primal magic dice up your sleeve. So when that critical Blizzard, Hoarfrost, or the teleport, or something that's gonna, they really want to do, that's when you chuck all your resources at them. And knowing that you could roll 4 1s and you can't kill yourself. Not that you want to roll 4 1s, but there is no repercussion for rolling bad other than the spell going through. But for your opponent who's trying to get off Blizzard, they roll a 1 in on the original spell cast, they're asking for trouble. They roll double 1 through their process, there's going to be pain to them.
And that's something you realize. And one of the nice things about like the new hand card icon and just unbinds in general is like you can sit on them, and like let's say your opponent does their like super important spell first, and they throw all their resources trying to unbind. Instead of unbinding it, be like, fine, you get your super important spell. But now every other spell you cast, I'm going to unbind. Even though they're not super important, maybe in aggregate, they're still good. So you've just hurt their army greatly. And if they didn't throw everything at their important one, then you unbind that. And they get all their lesser ones off, and you still hurt them. So there's like that decision making. So obviously a little dicey, but like you can really play around with the knowledge you have through their casting on what you want to do with it. And it's not so bad. That I think a lot of people were pretty doomer about the Magic season, but I think that's been nice, is being able to use these primal dice in that way.
I'm glad that we've gotten to this point, because that's kind of what I wanted to not hear from you about that particular point, but how do we feel about the current season, right? Because the first set of rules, which is the Antorian Locus keyword, you don't get it. You do not have any wizard heroes with 9 wounds or less. You just don't have them. You can ally them in, but they're not going to become Antorian Locuses for the benefit of what you need them for, right? So for you, when you are starting to think about primal magic dice and some of the things that come off Antorian Locus, you're not using them to boost up Hoarfrost. In fact, you can't even take Hoarfrost or Blizzard. You're really using it to deny your opponent and their spell casting, and force them in situations where maybe there is that critical spell that they want to get off, and they really need it. So you get them to burn their primal dice. Like that. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of roughly how you're thinking about it all?
Yeah, that's basically it. And since, I don't need primal dice for anything but unbinds, that's fine. I mean, they don't need them for unbinds, but that's fine too. Like, that means it's my primal dice versus theirs, but I have all the information and they don't. And they have the ability to primal miscast and I don't. So the realm rules haven't really been that detrimental. The most detrimental part is that there are a couple tactics that play into it. And then there's like one battle plan, I think, that kind of like really aids Antorian Locus. Although there's also one that should, but then you get points for killing wizards, so like my opponents wouldn't get any points off me. So there's overall I don't think it's that bad a season for Fyreslayers in that respect.
Do you have any artifacts or any abilities that enhance your unbinding and dispelling power?
No, there are none. Just the anti-magic artifacts in Fyreslayers are the Ash Cloud, which is the can't see, and the Nullstone, which is the ignore spellcast. There used to be one, but there's no longer a Fyreslayers artifact that does that.
I think that's what I was thinking of. I'm like, surely I thought you had something, but the Ash Cloud's a really interesting one, right? So for Fyreslayers priests, it's that once per battle ability, and for a lot of armies going for, I mean, look, there's only 5 battle rounds you can cast Blizzard on anyway. Turn 1, they're very unlikely to be casting Blizzard at you. When you activate this once per battle artifact, the units that are wholly within 12 inches of until the end of the phase, units wholly within 12 inches of the bearer are not visible to the enemy unit attempting to cast a spell. So Blizzard is a 12-inch range. If you set up correctly, or if you set up in a way that you probably stop your opponent either from being in range or seeing what they want to Blizzard, or force them into an area that they want to Blizzard something that isn't what's got the Ash Cloud or protected by the Ash Cloud.
And that's usually what you do is you'll make that you'll force their hand to, where you'll do things like they'll see that you could use there's 2 types of opponents that consider the Ash Cloud and those that don't. If they're not considering it, then you just use it whenever. But if they are, you'll start to see them positioning wizards to hit what they want to hit. So you can start moving your priests so they can't, and it becomes like a chess match. And then also you can put it on a Rune Smiter, which you can deep strike. And another thing about it is it stops buff spells too, because it's all units wholly within 12, not just friendly units. So, for instance, like I've deep struck a Rune Smiter next to my units, and knowing that it was a Ogre's player, and he wanted to cast buff spells on his Iron Guts, and they were within 12, or wholly within 12, because you only have to be outside 9, and it was only a small group of them. He can't cast a buff spell on them because they're not visible. So these are the kind of things you can consider.
It's a good pickup because it doesn't actually say friendly or enemies. It just says until the end of that phase, units wholly within 12 inches of the bearer are not visible to enemy units attempting to cast a spell. So
Correct. And you can stop Hoarfrost, for instance, if you're in combat, like a priest is behind your lines and you're in combat with an enemy and they're like, great, I'm going to give these guys -3 rend or 1 to hit on their turn. And then you know they're going to do that. And you're just like Ash Cloud. And they're like, I can't cast Hoarfrost. I can't cast Blizzard. I can't cast any of these spells on anyone in this area. You've just completely ruined their battle plan. And like, I've given turns away on top of 2. Like when I've won, I've been like, yeah, take it. I'm going to use Ash Cloud and just completely neuter your whole round 2. So
I love it. I love it. I play with my gits. I've been playing with these, not the Loon Smasher fanatics, the Spore Splaters who block line of sight. And normally I have my wizards behind. I'm like, damn it! Like I've got to make sure that I don't block myself from casting and like the line of sight shenanigans. I dig that a lot. So what I'm hearing basically, primal magic dice. You're using it often to unbind spells. We aren't really casting spells, makes sense. Antorian Locus, there's really no area to play with it that much.
Yeah. Fyreslayer's game plan is just countering it, not playing with it. So,
which then leads us to basically this doesn't matter because the command traits aren't going to change because you do not have Antorian Locus to be the general. Even if you did, you're probably not going to be choosing this type of general, even if you could, but you can't. So it's almost like, who cares? Move forward.
Not for us.
If you did, let's say, let's just play hypothetical here. Let's say Dawnbringer's 3 Electric Boogaloo has a new Fyreslayers wizard.
That'd be wild, but yeah.
Let's just say hypothetically.
I hope he's on a Magmadroth.
So. Let's just say he's like a 6-wound idiot, like they always like to release, right? Let's play the game. Would you take any of those if you had the option?
The only one I would take would be Eater of Magic, just because I could, being able to eat someone else's spell, especially when Fyreslayers spells aren't really and Fyreslayers wouldn't have any impactful spells because he probably wouldn't have any spell lore. It's like, okay, I don't need any of the other stuff. Let's just eat magic and go for the unbinds. But I guess theoretically you could do the Shaman of the Chilled Lands and get Hoarfrost on your. If you had Hoarfrost, if you could, you can't. But if you could cast Hoarfrost, you would put it onto Volkites, give them 3 rend. The Flamekeepers give them potentially 3 damage swings. You could have them with a Runefather up to 41 swings on a 10-man unit. 2s and 2s, -3 rend, 3 damage each. So you would be basically lifting anything in the game with those. So,
all right, Kevin, I don't want to go too deep in this because I feel like I'm just rubbing salt into the wound. But I'm just playing the hypothetical game. But yes, just to confirm, you cannot get this currently unless something in the new world in future me has access to. And that's kind of true here with the spells. Is it fair to say when you look at your opponent's list, right? So let's say you and I rock up to a tournament, we're playing each other, and I have Hoarfrost, Rupture, and Merciless Blizzard, where maybe I have my general is the Shaman of the Chilled Land. Are any of these ones concerning? Are these ones that you will put your primal magic dice? What are the considerations for you with these 3 spells running around on the tables?
For Rupture, I don't often see it. I mean, there's the niche case with the Incarnates when you see it, right? And that with it, they casting themselves essentially to make their Incarnate Wild neat things. I'll usually try to either unbind that so they can't, or I'll unbind the Endless spell itself. So whichever one they get off, I'll try to get the other. Because if there's no endless spells, they can't eat an endless spell. So Rupture, I'm not super concerned about. Hoarfrost, it is annoying to see a unit get to like -3, but because it's random, I don't feel that it's super impactful. And then the other thing is Fyreslayers are so strong in combat and they fight on death that it's not usually like I'm losing a game because they got 3 rend or they hit on 1s now. Like, I don't think I've ever lost a game because someone got Hoarfrost off. The only one that seems very impactful is Merciless Blizzard, which is the 12-inch range. I feel is like skews things so hard with the being able to teleport and like while it is a gamble for them to get it, I've had an opponent roll the dice, get the gamble, and nuke a Magmadroth off the field, and like that is so impactful to a game to have a spell that can just delete almost anything in the game. That's the only one I'm really worried about. So.
Yeah, and I played a tournament a few weeks ago, and I was able to, with my Gits Wizards, these 25 mil bases, literally do that. Teleport with Hand of Gork, set up, pin it with another unit, like a Mega Gargant or like just any other unit, then throw down Blizzard. I think the key for me, if you're seeing that particular thing, is shut down the teleport. If the unit has a spell, obviously Skaven does it in the movement phase, so that doesn't matter anyway, unless they go double. But like for anyone who can teleport in range and wants to do Blizzard, you need to shut down the teleport because they're probably keeping those primal magic dice to put into Merciless Blizzard. Because on a casting value of 12, it's really hard. Like on 2 dice, it's near impossible. You're going to need to go like 3d6, the average is 10. 2d6 average is 7, 3d6 average is 10, 4d6 average is 14. So really, they've got to chuck a lot of resources, and they're going to keep the primal magic dice up their sleeve unless they've got like the Antorian Acolytes Battalion that gives them a couple of extra dice potentially through the game.
Yeah, and typically the most consideration with Blizzard I find isn't the... I mean, I can do the spacing where it's like I know they're outside 9, if I'm 3 inches back, and then on top of that, like I'm outside 12, so I can make them have to Blizzard things like Volkites or whatever if they teleport. It's the consideration more like knowing which unit has it, and when I'm charging, like I need to make sure I stay outside of 12, or on their turn, they're going to nuke my unit that I just charged with. Those kinds of things. That's usually the consideration of Blizzard more than teleportation, because if someone's got their wizard set up right behind their lines, you know that if you charge them and don't get a double, their turn they're immediately going to shoot, like Blizzard that unit. So that's most of the consideration, is doing that measurement over and over. And I'll often do things like I'll measure and see like there's a tiny edge where you can charge, so I'm just going to charge that with a Magma Droth and like kind of hug it and not pile in any further. Or like if I roll like a really hot on the charge, I can get in on the wizard themselves, do that. But that's usually the thing, is you end up doing a lot of measuring to make sure you stay out of range, more than worrying about the teleportation. So
yeah, and because not everyone can teleport, so it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. I guess it just depends. And look, there's certain units that have really good movement that can take advantage of Blizzard. I guess what we're sharing here, folks, is just some considerations on how, if you are being currently wrecked by Merciless Blizzard, you had a bad time, and how do we kind of stop and avoid it, and how do we like mitigate it? I guess there's a couple of tools and ideas to help you depending on the situation, because not everyone can teleport. Not everyone has a lot of little wizards, or they're cheap wizards. So often you'll only see like one wizard with Merciless Blizzard.
Yeah, and it's one we didn't speak of. You said like it's not just hero-based teleport. Which one happened to me recently was the orcs can issue a hero phase move.
Sure.
And then they can move in range into the nuke. So you always have to ask your opponent like about their hero phase teleports and movements before the game. Ask them like, can you move your wizards? Can you teleport them? Know this before you go into the game and they surprise you with it. So.
Or another example, and I'm having this conversation with my tournament players next week. We're running no reward without risk, without any FAQs or an errata. So you can absolutely deploy on their line, and if you don't measure out, as you said, the 12 inches, you could be nuked from round 1. So keep that in mind, folks. Kev, anything else you'd mention about these particular spells? I think to your point, Rupture, it's specifically for an Incarnate build. We are seeing Incarnates increasing a little more on the table. It's the likes of Tzeentch and things like that, where they want to do it on themselves. You've got Hoarfrost, which is a couple of little combinations here and there. It's good value, but you're probably not going to lose the game off the back of Hoarfrost. But it's Blizzard, and it's the particular turns and setups where people are going to set up for Blizzard that you need to think about. And, you talked a little earlier about, the spell shrugging, the wards, certain things like your Flamekeeper. You've got a lot of things up your sleeve.
Yeah. And it mostly is that you need to consider your tools at hand, do the measurements, make sure that if they're getting Blizzard off, it's costing them something. Because that's what it's really about. Make sure that they're not getting it off for free. So... and if you can do that, and especially if it's in your spell ignore, they're paying a price for this Blizzard, and they might not even get it. it might just be ignored. Like, make sure those kinds of things are happening.
Or they roll a 1 on the spell casting, and they just like, nah, I don't want to chance it. But
I'm not pushing my luck.
Yeah, I did it once, and I learnt my lesson when I just blew up a whole bunch of things in the backfield. But otherwise, as soon as I see a 1 on the original spell casting, I shut it down and I hold off. Even if I really want to do Blizzard, putting my Stormcast hat on for a second, I would not do that to you. I would not teleport, come down from the sky and try to Blizzard you. My Daughters of Cain would not try to mirror dance and try to get in front with you. It's really only my gits because I've got like this 65, 70 point wizard that I can afford to sacrifice. And even my cities, like I wouldn't spend 110 points to do that. So, but especially with all the spell shrugging stuff.
It's mostly just making sure you don't walk into it. So don't walk your guys into their blizzard.
Don't. Yeah. But what you can walk into is a free enhancement, like that segue. Yeah. Oh shit! I've got the Cities of Sigma thing up. Ignore the fact that I've got cities on the anyway. This little banner at the top.
We're talking Cities of Sigma here, folks.
Your Nullstone Adornments. Oh, good lord!
It's okay. They can take it too.
They can fix it as well. So you got your Nullstone Adornments, and that's probably the thing that you are going to get a benefit from. And with the enhancements, you obviously get a free one, and you can go, command Entourage. You can go Warlord and get yourself an extra one. You can't put it on someone who already has an artifact. You can't do 2 Nullstone Adornments on the one hero. So first off, which one is your favorite of the 3?
My favorite's the hand-carved Nullstone kind. Although I do like Pouch of Null Dust. The hand-carved is just useful in every situation, basically. So it's the one you usually end up taking. One consideration, though, with them is that you can't give them to units that have an artifact, right? Yes. If I'm going Greyfyrd and I have 5 artifacts, then I'm putting it on the one hero without artifacts. Which hero is that going to be? So you have to make that consideration. Because I've seen the mistake of people putting them on units with artifacts because they're using warscroll builder or whatever. And yeah, that's actually a real consideration, is knowing that you can't do that.
Yeah, I had to pull, when I did some tournament list reviewing for my event, I had to pull a few people up to go, you can't do that. And you also can't put it on a unique hero, so don't do that either.
Yeah.
So please don't. So sorry, which one are you picking the most? Was it the
hand-carved Nullstone? The hand-carved Nullstone icon. Because the thing about it is, it's not just that if you successfully unbind, you get more unbinds. I mean, that is powerful. It's that you don't have to spend your heroic action to get heroic willpower to unbind. And then also the knowledge that if you unbind something, you get more unbinds can influence how your opponents play. Because if they roll low on a roll, let's say they roll 5, even if they get that spell off, they know that you will just go for the unbind. Because why wouldn't you? Because you get a free unbind. So you're going to do it. So now your opponents are really considering every roll, like, do I use a dice for this? Like, do I make... And then if they do, and you go, well, then I'm just not going to unbind it. And then they go to the next roll, and you're like, all right, you got no more primal dice. This is the one I'm unbinding. Like, that power, and once again, abusing the fact that you know the primal dice usage before you have to use it, makes the hand-carved Nullstone icon so powerful. And that's why I like it. So
it's interesting that you pick that one, because for me, the one that's been the most impactful against my opponents has been the Null Dust, where if I am setting up for the Merciless Blizzard, we just talked for a good probably 5 minutes on Blizzard alone. When I'm setting up and you can read that the opponent's going to set up for for Blizzard, you can just throw down your pouch and go, yep, cool. Well, now any 1s, 2s, or 3s with doubles is going to be counted as a miscast, or a primal miscast, which then makes the risk even greater, knowing that, again, double 1, double 2, double 3 could be a miscast instead of just double 1.
And that's my second favorite one, and it's close. Like, I'm not going to say, like, oh, hand carved is the greatest one in the world, and that's crap. Like, no, I like the Pouch of Null Dust a lot, and I used it a lot. In fact, if I could take both, I would, and sometimes I do. The problem Pouch of Null Dust has is it's kind of running in the same spot as the Cloud Rune, which is once per game I'm denying your spell casting. Right? That's what it's doing. And do I need twice per game I'm denying your spell casting? I mean, sometimes, yeah. But you're already probably, if you need that niche, you're probably taking something for it. So you have your other, which is I need unbinds for things that aren't necessarily things that they're going for, like Blizzard. Just having unbinds for things like their Mystic Shield, their little buffs or their little offensive spells, having just the ability to keep unbinding all these things is very powerful. And then if they're going for the Blizzard, you have your Ash Cloud Rune. You don't have to worry about Pouch of Null Dust. Now, I do like Pouch of Null Dust, and it's great, and it's especially strong with hand-carved Nullstone Adornments. And if you take Warlord, you can get both. So you can do the hand-carved, and then you can, especially for one turn, you're really pushing them, because now if they roll 1, 2, or 3, they're debating on their primal dice, and you have infinite unbinds, potentially. So you're really pushing a magic army hard up against the wall with that. So I do like that combo.
I love what you shared. So basically, you either can go the hand-carved Nullstone icon for great utility throughout the game to get you that extra unbind and dispel attempt throughout the game, which is awesome to stop down those buff pieces, those debuffs, the other things that the opponent wants to do. But if you're super scared of that one critical spell, you've got the Pouch of Null Dust. You can combine it with the Ash Clouds, which gives you either 2 chances throughout the game, or you can do like this super one particular turn, no spells are going to hurt me. I guess it depends on what's happening in your meta and what you're most concerned about, what's the most valuable. And to your point, would you take both? And that was going to be one of my questions to you. Yes, it absolutely could be a viable option. But to your point, going the extra artifacts from the Vostarg? No,
Greyfyrd.
No, Greyfyrd. Getting the extra artifacts, it does make a tough choice, because you're going to have, do you have too many artifacts, and what do you need, and what's the trade-off? So
yeah, and it depends on your list too. So Magma Droths will be more afraid of things like Blizzard than something like Volkites, where it's like, if you kill a unit of Volkites, my game plan's not over. But like if you kill one of my Magma Droths, it might be. So that kind of thing. And that plays into like the Polished Nullstone Pebble, which is protecting one unit. And it's like, that's just not impactful enough for Fyreslayers to matter. Like, yes, it might be great on like a Magma Droth, but you usually are giving them an artifact, like the once per game 3-up ward, which is far more powerful. And in this case, it just doesn't really do much for Fyreslayers. Like, we have other artifacts that can do more for the slot. And if it's just the other two are so much better that it's better not to take Polished Nullstone.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask you, if you were going to take the Nullstone Pebble, would it be on a Magma Droth? And then are you trading off something of more value? And you've just answered my question. Magma Droth is definitely the best of the picks. But as you said, a 3-up ward is far greater than the Nullstone Pebble. I would take that every day of the week.
The only other unit you could possibly want it on would be like a Rune Father if he was your general, a Foot Rune Father. But you have a 3-up Shrug to Auric or Hearthguard Berserkers, which you'd probably be abusing. And like, the chances are he's not dying unless someone rolls really hot on their Blizzard to that. And like, there's no other real spells that would kill him or threaten him in any major way to warrant it. And then he's going to shrug the spell off to the Hearthguard. So that's not great for you. So yeah, it's the only niche case I could maybe consider is if you're playing hyper aggressive with a Magma Droth and you know you're getting opponents with lots of offensive spells, because now you can run your Magma Droth into your opponent's lines. If he casts Blizzard on the Magma Droth, there's a chance he's actually casting it onto his own units. Because if you shrug it, it just says select another unit, not another friendly unit. So you could be selecting one of his units that he's just cast Blizzard on the Magma Droth. So that's the only niche case I could maybe consider, but it's just not worth that gamble. So.
It sounds too niche for me, like way too niche. Like, nah, I'd rather just not do that.
It'd be hilarious, but it's too niche. So.
It's super niche. Nah, it's not happening. Something that also is not happening is Antorian Locus Battalion. So the Antorian Acolyte is a battalion that you don't have to worry about because it gets you some extra primal dice, but you don't have wizards, so let's just ignore that. But tell me about the wizard fighters of Andor, because it's not as obvious, And I'm not seeing as many lists using this particular battalion, whether it's because they value Battle Regiment or Warlord or Command Entourage better, whether it's the fact that they just don't see enough wizards that they're worrying about taking this particular build to handle that wizard, because most wizards are sitting behind a castle or some type of defense. What do you think about Wizard Fighters of Andor? Is it something that Fyreslayers benefit from, or are you going to your traditional battalions?
Fyreslayers are in a rather unique position with Wizard Finders of Andor because it's not a leader, it's a hero. So Fyreslayers are, I don't think the only, but one of the few armies that have a hero that is not a leader. Two of them, in fact, the Doomseeker and the Grimwrath Berserker. So with those, you can put them into the champion slot and then put 2 infantry. So you could still have Battle Regiment, although it wouldn't be impactful, or double Warlord. You can do double Warlord and then also do Wizard Finders of Andor, or double Command Entourage. And that means you can, even if it's not super impactful, you could give like Hearthguard units or Volkite units the Wizard Finders of Andor too, which means if something like a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon comes in, you get the bonus attack against him. Great, because he's a wizard. So if someone put like a flaming weapon onto their Frost Lord on Stonehorn, or like the Arcane Tome onto their Frost Lord on Stonehorn or something like that, great. Like you can now actually, you get bonus attacks into them. And it also can play into like armies that have wizard units like Lumineth or Tzeentch. So it's free if you have a Grimwrath or Doomseeker, so why not take it? Like, it's not going to hurt you to have your Volkites and your Hearthguard getting those bonus attacks, so just take it. And it can be beneficial. I've had, because of the Rune Father's +1 attack aura, and then I had some Volkites, a 10-man unit of Volkites had, when they charged, 51 attacks. Because they get 3 attacks on the charge, then +1 from the Rune Father, +1 from Wizard Finders, and then they had the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon had killed some units, so I had my Flamekeepers up. So I had 51 attacks with 3 damage swings, 2s and 2s. That Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon died. Like, there was no way he was going to live. So that's the kind of thing you can abuse with it, and it's free, so take it. Like, if you have that Grimwrath or Doomseeker, take the Wizard Finders at Andor. So,
I'm trying to think, like, there's so many monster... No, I'm trying to think of like how many monster heroes are also wizards. That's literally I'm trying to break out of my head. I'm like, okay, Archaon is definitely one of them.
I see him.
Vostar. Bellacor's not always as aggressive, right? Like least...
but if you can get on him, do it. Also, an interesting one with it is you can put it onto your Orc Hearthguard, which have only 1 attack in melee, and now they have 2 attacks in melee. And since you're probably deep striking them anyways, now you can gamble on that 9-inch charge into like Be'lakor and be like, yeah, I'm putting 2 attacks each with my mortal wounds on 6s to wounded at Be'lakor. Let's see if he lives. Like those kinds of things. So Be'lakor, Archaon, Empire Lord. Sometimes you'll see Arcane Tome on things.
Sure, yeah. If the Arcane Tome's there, there's probably... I'm going to make a random stat, and it's not legit. I'd have to actually sit down properly think about it. You can probably at least expect 1/3 of your monster heroes probably are going to be wizards, somewhere between 1/3 to 1/2.
A good enough amount that it comes into play during a tournament. I've at least 1 or 2 armies I fight will have a monster wizard, and when that happens, Wizard Fire and Andor, great. Like having your pole axes have 3 attacks each, and mortal wounding on 6s means that they're like an Arcan coming in is now really afraid of those pole axes. Like that kind of thing. So,
which is interesting because in most armies, like you don't have the volume. Like you go from 1 attack to 2. It's like, so what? You're not pulling down Archaon unless it's like Graveguard or something. But for you, because you've got so many other ways of getting extra attacks and extra buffs, and you really start stacking them up, that does actually make your Wizard Finders of Andor a significant threat to any wizards, especially those who are aggressive coming at your face.
A really good example of the threat is, I almost killed him. I just failed killing Archaon with this. I had a Grimwrath Berserker with it. So he's got his 4 attacks each. He goes to 5 attacks now. And then he goes to... now these are going to be added after, but he's got Magmal Ale. So I double his attacks. So that's 8 attacks, right? Then I add 1, 9. I'd use the Rune Father, so he's got 10. So he's got 10 attacks. And then if he dies or doesn't die, he gets to fight again. So he's got 20 attacks. So... and I had him hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s. He had -3 rend and 2 damage each, and like, yeah, that's a lot of damage for a 110 point hero. So,
I was going to say, what a great trade piece. 110
yeah.
points, even if you can like mostly degrade the profile, what a great
Yeah,
trade.
I think he
points.
took like an Archaon. I was playing a friend. I took his Archaon down to like 4 wounds remaining, and he was like, "How much is that hero?" I'm like, 110 points. Let's go. Like that's the kind of thing. So you do that.
And it's so unassuming that like if you see this 110 point hero running at you, you're like, okay,
yeah, whatever. How many attacks he got? 4. He'll be fine.
Bro, I'm like the 13th. I'm the leader of the end times. Like I am the ever chosen. Like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
a lot.
I got me axe. Let's go, baby. So,
I have a slap, but yeah, obviously. Okay, I'm hearing there's a little bit more benefit to you versus other factions that I'm talking to, and I am seeing that Wizard Fighters of Andor is definitely a battalion worth exploring, especially because you don't rely on having to be battle regiment and being the lowest drops possible. You've obviously got things like Greyfyrd where you can get extra artifacts anyway, which is where most people are going command Entourage or Warlord to get extra artifacts. You can get them for free through your sub-faction, and yeah, why not? Why not? It's not a bad little battalion.
Yeah, you can do double Warlord, double command Entourage, and that. Yeah, all right, I'll take it. So,
and because you have leaders that are not heroes, that does allow you to dig it. I dig it. Oh, sorry, heroes that are not leaders.
Yeah, heroes that aren't leaders, you can just get it, and it's no big. It's free. So,
I have a saying: if it's free, it's for me. I like it.
Yeah.
What are your grand strats? Are these obviously your General's Handbook ones? Do they stand out for you as you're like, I'm going to stop using my Fyreslayers ones and now move here? Or do you think the ones natively in your book are still better choices?
The right now, the book ones are the better choice. Masters of the Forge, there's very few armies that can consistently stop you from getting it. It's basically Khorne. And even Khorne won't always do it because it's dicey. And it depends on how many priests they've taken. Because they also have to eat their prayer. Because if you banish something, you're chanting. You can't chant, right? And you can only banish in your turn, not your opponent's. So they're basically going, I've killed your priests. It's round 5. I've taken the bottom of round 5. I still have my priests available. I'm not going to chant for anything. I'm just going to try to banish, and I'm going to try to banish your Molten Infernoth probably on a 5-up and your Runic Firewall on a 4-up. Like, it's just really hard to deny generally. I think I've had denied like once in the past like 6 months or whatever. So it's very rare that I get denied. Now, maybe we'll see it more often denied with the new Cities book coming with, the priest that everyone's going to take because it's incredibly low cost, the 150 Palanquin one.
Oh, yeah, the Pope.
Yeah, the Pope could deny it more often, but we'll see. At the moment, I'm never taking these over Master of the Forge. Now, if I were to take one, it would probably be Overshadow. And maybe Barren Landscape, because Overshadow, it's like I typically have a lot of battle line. Well, some armies don't have a lot of battle line, and when they do, I'm probably getting into combat to try to fight them and kill them. So that one I'm probably going to go for. And then Slaughter the Sorcery is also good, except for there's a lot of armies that have one wizard that they're going to play keep away with. Yeah. If they know you have that, they're going to just tuck them in a corner and be like, you're never going to get this. And that's going to... Now, obviously bad players might not, but you're not counting on your opponent playing poorly. You're counting on them playing well. And so they're just going to tuck that wizard away. Although it is a great instant grand strat if you do play Khorne. So
yeah, and it is a good one. The challenge is that if I do play keep away with one of my wizards, you don't have the threat range to be able to get to that wizard. It's not like you've got a bunch of long strikes or you've got high range or high offensive magic to kind of reach out and touch that wizard. So you're relying on combat, and that is a hard one. I can see, first off, Master of the Forge is such an auto-include. It's like the Daughters of Cain. As long as everything fights or dies, you win.
Or the Tzeentch one, which is literally uninteractive, which is just, I have my dice. All right, cool, I got my grand strategy. Like, great job. You did it.
Or Slaanesh is like, yeah, cool, I won't summon with depravity, and I win. So
yeah, you weren't going to do that anyways. All right, cool. So... all good.
What I'm hearing, Master of Forge, we're not moving from it. Yeah. If you had to, because, and look, a couple of tournaments have said, GHB only, what I'm hearing is Overshadow probably could be the better of the choice.
Yeah, maybe Barren Landscape since our Icescape, because I've seen quite a few people, very few armies stack artifacts, and you have a lot. But not that it matters how many you have. And so usually when they're getting an artifact, it's on something they're putting up the field, like a Bloodthirster or something. And now they have to be like, oh crap, I have to like play keep away with my artifact. And that's a lot harder to do than a wizard typically, not always. So so it's it's situational.
I'm also seeing a trend where people are moving away from extra artifacts for their battalion choices, and they're going into more spells because they do want Hoarfrost and Merciless Blizzard. So, but they also still want their lore spell, so they're going in and going double spell as opposed to an extra artifact. So that probably works into your favor with Barren Icescapes too. But
yeah. So overshadow that, and possibly Slaughter of Sorcery, especially if you're running Auric Hearthguard, so you have some shooting. That would be about it. But Master of the Forge is too good not to take.
It is too good. Like no one is actively not picking that one unless you're forced not to play with your book. Do you find any of the current season battle tactics useful? I imagine there's a couple. So certainly, sorry, I'll shut up. I'll let you talk. Are there ones that you find useful and you're using through the game?
I mean, obviously, any spellcasting one is right out, so that's out. The ones that are the easiest are probably, I mean, for most armies, it's going to be Surround and Destroyed, which I've been running, like, I've been allying in quick units sometimes to help with that.
Which ones? Which ones? Don't move from that because people will be like, ooh, allies.
Oh, like Sky Wardens or a Gyrocopter. That I'll ally them in just for the Surround and Destroyed, possibly like a gunboat from KO. I own a bunch of KOs, so it makes it easy for me to ally those in. And Wardens have very good utility otherwise, I find. I accidentally happened upon this with a meme list, and I've been running it now. And then Led into the Maelstrom is good because it's just most of your heroes and most of your battle lines are already together and already charging, so great. Like, we're doing it good. And then the Intimidate the Invaders, which is just on some battle plans like criminally easy, so why not do it? Those three are like
some of them are near impossible. It's like half the battle is your territory. It's like,
what's the one? I can't think of the name. The one where you charge, you count for more on objectives. It's like a step or something. I can't remember. Anyway, that one, that one's really, really hard to get that on. Like, because the way it's like a Z, like a zigzag through the center, and there's like barely any, and you're like, I'm never getting this tactic until like the end of the game, probably. So, but typically those three, and then occasionally Bait and Trap, depending on who you're playing, can come into play. Obviously, I
was going to ask you about Bait and Trap, given that you have to retreat, and for a lot of your troops, they're expensive unit choice. It's not like you've got these cheap things you can throw away in turn one. Although if you do have those gyrocopters, for example, you could charge them in and then retreat them out, and something new charges later on.
I usually use it like I'll have Volkites in combat, and then there's like 2 Volkites in the unit left. Maybe a couple units of those, I retreat them out, knowing that I'm going to rally them on a 4-up next turn, and then charge in 2 different units. And they don't have to be Volkites; it could be anything. I've gotten it by charging in like Flamekeepers, or like a random hero, like Rune Smiter, go! Like, you just charge in anybody, right? So I'll retreat out 2 Volkites, charge in those 2 idiots. It doesn't matter who they are, and then like rally my Volkites for next turn. So one of my Volkites will go from like 2 left to like 6 left, which is nice. And then they're set up for next turn. So it's kind of one of those things, you Bait and Trap, you have to set up for. You kind of plan it out. You're like, I'm going to charge in more units and put these guys here so that next turn I know I have a tactic I can get. So.
Yeah. And when you're charging in, you want to charge in, especially if you've got like a small hero, like just tag the side of a unit to reduce the amount of attacks coming back in. And even if the unit dies, you still score it because it doesn't have to survive for Bait and Trap. That you're right, you do have to set it up and think about the layers of how you think of that chronologically.
And like if it's round 4, I'll throw away a Rune Smiter for a tactic. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, turn 2 you're not, but turn 4, like, well, you know, you've kind of done your job, you've done your things.
Yeah, I've done Seize by Force, I've done Led into the Maelstrom, I've done like Surround and Destroyed. Sure, bait and trap time. Like, let's do it. So.
And obviously, reprisal is situational, right? And obviously, you don't want to bank on the fact that your general's dead, and it's not like my tactic. But if you find yourself in a position where your general has died, you've obviously triggered reprisal.
Yeah, it's like a worse version of a Fyreslayer tactic there already is, so it's definitely very situational. The Fyreslayers have one called, I believe it's like Grudge Fulfilled or something, and that one is
Settle a Grudge.
Yeah, that one's like kill a unit of theirs that killed a unit of yours, basically. I don't remember the exact wording. So, which if they killed your general, they fulfilled that. So you can use both of those in a battle, obviously. But like typically, I use that one like later in the game, like something like for instance, I had one where a Mega Gargant had killed a Volkite unit earlier in the game, and then it's towards the end of the game that Gargant's got 2 wounds left. You're like, yeah, I'm settling the grudge, so let's do it. That kind of thing.
Maybe one more question about battle tactics. I maybe have an opinion, but I'm curious to hear from you. One of the things that a lot of players struggle with is the turn 1 battle tactic. And for a lot of people, they'll go either intimidate the invaders or they'll do magical dominance as 2 particular ones that they'll go with. Magical dominance is obviously out for you. Intimidate the invaders can be incredibly difficult for you depending on the battle plan. Do you have a good turn 1 battle tactic you often use? And if you do, is it Seize by Force? Like, I'm just rereading Seize by Force. I'm like, if I deploy off an objective, and obviously it depends on the battle plan and how many objectives are on the table, but if I deploy off an objective, so give my opponent 1, 2, and more, Seize by Force could be a good turn 1 battle tactic if the conditions are correct.
That's correct. That's like Fyreslayer's 101 tactic. It's like, don't deploy on objectives. Like, you deploy off the objectives, let your opponent set up. And if your opponent knows you have that, they'll start deploying off objectives, which is fine because a lot of armies don't like doing that setup. And then it makes, if they give you turn 1, you getting the hold 1, hold 2, hold more much easier, because then you can just like scooch a little bit and you get it. So you're okay if your opponent denies it, and you're really happy if they don't. So it's one of those, Seize by Force is the turn 1 tactic if you can accomplish it. Because there are maps where you can't. If there's no objective you can start on, then you can't accomplish it.
Sure. Yeah.
The other turn 1 is typically, intimidate the invaders if it's the battle plan favors it. There's only 2 battle plans where you can't easily do Seize by Force or intimidate the invaders. Those 2 battle plans, it becomes extremely difficult without a wizard to do. Typically, I have a fast-moving unit and then another unit auto-run to do bait and trap. So, for instance, I'll take the... because the movement on Skywardens is 12 inches, you can auto-run them 18 or just walk them outside the territory in almost any battle plan and then auto-run a hero or just walk up Magmadroth or run a Magmadroth outside on a different area and then just pull Priest back and get that for your turn 1. So the 3 turn 1s I typically use are Intimidate the Invaders, Bait and Trap, and Seize by Force. There are niche cases for some others, but those are the 3. So
Yep, I see that. I like it. No, cool. Thank you. Because like a lot of people go for magical dominance, and I'm like, you can't do it. Like, it's not really a thing for you. So what are your other options? You
do have to think about it a little bit, Fyreslayers. In your deployment, you need to be thinking. You are, as a Fyreslayers player in deployment, you're already thinking like, round 1, what are my tactics? Round 2, what are my tactics? Round 3, because like you're so slow typically, and your tactics are so niche that you need to be. You're moving your units in round 1 for what they're going to be doing in round 3. So
that was my point. That was my point, is you don't have the speed. So how do you think about intimidate the invaders when it might not be on the table turn 1 for you to score? And I've seen too many people just burn something like, just throw away it and give away a battle tactic turn 1 and be down. That just puts on more pressure. But I like the idea of bringing in Sky Wardens, Gyrocopters, some other ally that can fill the void of speed that is cheap enough for you to leverage. And Gyrocopters are...
80
Gyrocopters
points.
are like 80 points right now. So 2 Gyrocopters, that's an easy surround and destroy. It's an easy intimidate the invaders. It's going to be a potentially an easy bait and trap. for 160 points for 2 units, I think you're kind of laughing.
And they're about to get a rather large buff, the gyrocopters. So, yeah, pretty solid. And then Sky Wardens are great too because they also make the bait and trap tactic easier because you can, even if you have only 1 unit in combat, Sky Wardens when they fight can retreat on a 2-up. So you can have 1 unit in combat and you can charge your Sky Wardens in and then retreat them and still get 2 units retreating as long as you charge 2 different units. So if you can charge 3 units that turn as long as one of them is your Sky Wardens, you can still get bait and trap on a 2-up, which I have failed that before. But
yeah,
it's a little dicey, but on a 2-up, it's worth trying, right? So it's one of those niche utility things. So
they are a little more expensive though. Like you're paying a little bit more, but you probably get more as well from like shooting output. And you know what? That might be the unit that can go chase down those wizards.
That's what
if there's that little wizard in the backfield, where the gyrocopter is probably not the thing that's going to take down a little 6 wound, 5 wound wizard behind the fields.
But the Sky Wardens absolutely will. And
yes.
Southern, I was in a tournament Southern Fried, and those Sky Wardens on their own killed like 3 Skaven wizards. They were just in his backfield hunting those dudes down. And like he could not stop them because he would have to pull his Vermin Lords back away from his front lines, and then those would fold. So you just have Sky Wardens in his back lines, just like, yep, that's a dead Gracier, and that one, like, and he can't stop it. So
no, yeah. I love it. I love that.
So they're good wizard killers. So that's why I've been allying them in recently. So.
Okay, and you can ally 2 because they're not over 200 points, so you could ally 2 units in if you wanted.
If you want, I usually just do 1, but you could potentially do 2 units of Sky Wardens to make that intimidate the invaders really easy, or that surround and destroy, or something like that. Like just makes those movement-based tactics all the easier.
Would you do a gun hauler and Sky
You could do that, yeah. I don't know if I would, but you could, especially if you want to do the old like roll the gamble of the gun hauler's mortal wounds. So.
I'm just thinking because the gun hauler, because the warscroll changes and stuff has happened on the warscroll. So,
yeah,
cool. Before we get into lists, maybe the last thing I'll probably ask is just in regards to the Grimhold. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on the Grimhold Exile, given this is a new unit from the Dawnbringer's book?
I generally like the Grimhold. I know some people are kind of down on him. I mean, I am a little down on the fact that we got another 6 wound hero when we have like a whole book full of 6 wound heroes, but he adds something that Fyreslayers didn't have before, and that is the ability to make the infantry fast without prayers. Typically, you would use Emberstorm Prayer to give a unit run and charge. This ran into issues where, for instance, if you ran and charged your Hearthguard Berserkers, they only get their ward if the hero's nearby. They would outrun their hero. Or if you tried to keep your hero up, the hero couldn't charge, so you would charge out of the range. Now he enables you to give it to not only himself but them and heroes with them. So that's a lot of utility he brings to Hearthguard Berserkers, and I think he sort of incidentally buffs Hearthguard Berserkers because of that. And then obviously, like it's situational, but his Last of the Lodge Fire is like hilariously good against certain monsters. Like if you drop the hammer on a Mega Gargant, great. So, and then Honor to Grimnir is the run and charge, which is fantastic. And he's pretty tanky, so yeah.
He's not, I guess that's the challenge, right? Is that he's just another hero in another slot. Do you want to give up something else, given that, it wasn't that long ago you got the Flamekeeper as well, who adds a lot of value to, the Horde-style Fyreslayers. You're right, like Last of the Lodge Fire is an interesting one, but outside of like a Mega Gargant, like you're playing against a traditional monster, it's 7 to 10 wounds on average?
It's usually good against like tankier monsters that maybe you don't get those wounds typically, like a Frost Lord or maybe a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. You drop that hammer. I've also used it on some other like heroes like Archaon and things like that. And like it's annoying for those heroes to have to deal with that. And it's also dicey where it's a 4-up, right? So maybe you do 7 wounds, maybe you do 14 wounds. And like that's kind of a fun thing about it. You usually don't take him for Last of the Lodge Fire. That's just a nice thing. You take him for Honor to Grimnir. So
100% correct. It is the last of the Lodge Fire is the cream on top, and it's good in that situation.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it's the honor to Grimnir, and that's why you're taking it, as well as being a minor hero and a couple of other things that it can do.
Yeah. And what he does is there's a list I had been running that allows him to, he enables basically split pushing. So you can take, for instance, this list I ran was 15 Hearthcard Berserkers, a Rune Father, a Grimwrath, and him. They run in one block. The Rune Father has the Fury of the Fyreslayers, so all of them have +1 to charge. On the other side of the board, you run some Volkite Shields with a Battlesmith and a Rune Sun on Magmadroth. So now you have 2 fronts you're basically running. You don't have to build your castle. You can separate it. You can have the castle if you want, but you can separate it and you can spread out. And because he gives that whole big block of him and his Hearthguard and his heroes, they all have their own ward because he's got his 4-up. They've got their 4-up. The Rune Father's got the Shrug. They're self-sufficient. They all can run and charge. You can just kind of like march them up the field while the Rune Sun and the Magmadroth and the Battlesmith and the Shield Berserkers all kind of move on their own up the field. And so it enables this kind of split push tactics you can do with them. And that's very nice. And it's a tactic you didn't have before, and he enables. So he has a spot. It's just finding it.
Can I also say that I enjoyed that brief moment where you struggle with their names, because as a non-Fyreslayer player, it's hard enough working out Volkite Berserker and all the different unit choices. And like, it's just get some unique names.
Yeah,
like,
that's GW naming conventions, right? Like when a Khorne player is describing, they're like, "This is Slaughter Brood, this is Blood Lover," and you're like, "I don't know. You gotta have. I don't know what this means." Like,
it's Slaughter or Blood, but it's like Auric this. There's a million Auric things.
Rune Smiter, Rune Dad, Rune Son, Battlesmith. You're like, okay.
The worst one for me is that you've got the Volkite Berserker. You've also then got the Hearthguard Berserker, and then you had Auric
Hearthguard.
The Auric Hearthguard. I was like,
and there's 2 different Volkite Berserkers. There's and I love that used to be a weapon option. Then they just made them 2 different units. Like, yeah, we gave you guys another unit. Look, and it's like you just separated the weapon option to 2 different units. Okay, so good job, GW. You did it. So,
you got an extra unit.
Yeah, you got another war scroll, guys. Oh, okay. Thanks. So.
Oh, far out. Well, let's talk your lists. And you've been kind enough to share one list that you did 4-1, which was awesome, recent in the current General's Handbook. And then we're going to preview another list that went 4-1 at the Old Town Throwdown, which you didn't play, but we'll give the appropriate credits when we get to that list. So This is a Vostarg list. Masters of the Forge, you have the Auric Rune Father on Magmadroth with the Master Rune of Unbreakable Resolve and the Coal Heart Ancient Melt trait. Auric Rune Master with the General, Master Priest, Volatile Brazier, and the Cursed Prayer. You've got a Rune Smiter with the Runic Iron and the Ember Storm. Battlesmith with the Nullstone icon. You have a Auric Flamekeeper with the hand-carved Nullstone icon. A Flamekeeper, a unit of... this is tough. This is
it's 4 units of axes, a unit of shields, Sky Wardens, Infernoth, Firewall. You don't have to go through the whole names here.
Oh, I'm trying to do it for a podcast, people who don't have the visuals. I'm like, I've hit my peak, and it's wrapped up in a double Warlord at 1980. So tell me about this list, how it works, what's the combinations, like what do I need to know about this particular list?
I'll note quickly that this list was technically 3-1 because I did run my second list at NashCon against Lumineth. And that list was 2... Magmadroth, the shooty Auric Hearthguard, they're the shooty boys, and it was about like deep striking in his face. This list, though, is you basically are setting up. This list is all about setting up your opponent to make poor decisions, because they need to kill your swarms of berserkers in order to hold objectives. But if they don't kill them, you hold the objectives and they do damage. If they do kill them, you get to use the 2 Flamekeepers to buff the berserkers that remain to do damage. And also the Flamekeepers can make them charge at the beginning of your opponent's combat phase. So even if they try to keep them out of combat, you're charging in berserkers, giving them the +1 damage. They get strike first, even if the opponent charged in their phase sometimes. and you are doing lots of damage. So it kind of makes your opponent start having to make these decisions. And all the while you have the Rune Father, who, if you buff up fully, can, slap for a ton of damage. And he's pretty tanky with the Master Rune and the Coldheart Ancient, which Coldheart Ancient is the mount trait, which reduces damage by 1 in melee. It technically reduces the damage characteristic of units in melee attacking him by 1, so that is important to note because it changes some things. But yeah, so you have this big block of Volkites. You have the Rune Father sort of playing free agent, going around doing what he does, getting tactics or killing things. And you're making the opponent make that hard decision of what do I fight? Where do I fight? When do I fight? All the while you have waves of dudes going forward and just shredding things. The firewall's controlling the battlefield for you. And the Infernoth is a slot machine where you're saying, yeah, I might only do 2 wounds to your hero this phase, or I'm going to do 12 wounds to your hero this phase. Let's see where it goes. Like I have at LVO, the Infernoth killed Manfred in 1 roll. So my opponent, God bless him, he kept it together when that happened. But yeah, the Molten Infernoth just like, boop, Manfred dead. So it's that slot machine. And the Sky Wardens are for tactics. They're also the wizard killer, but they're mostly there for tactics. So, and that's partially because the points increase made it so I couldn't take another axe. So why not just take Sky Wardens?
Yeah, and I was thinking Sky Wardens were a little bit more expensive than 130. Like when you compare what we talked about, not long ago, the Gyrocopter at 80 versus the 130. You're taking Sky. If you got the points, you're taking Sky Wardens because I think it adds more. I was thinking they were like 160, 170, but no, 130 is like, take them. They're great.
The new Gyrocopter though, in the New Cities book, 2 of those is 160. That becomes a little bit more of a decision making point. Also, the new Gyro Bomber is pretty good with its clatter gun.
Yeah, that's 110. They're 110 each, and I would probably rather Sky Wardens than a Gyro Bomber.
Yeah. No, I would take 1 Gyro Bomber just if I need those 20 extra points, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or 2 Gyrocopters if I had 30 more points. But otherwise, Sky Wardens hit that nice sweet spot of points and effectiveness where you they're good to take. And Engine Riggers are good in KO, but Sky Wardens are better out of KO. So I definitely think the 10 extra points are worth it to take the Sky Wardens over the Engine Riggers. So
how do you make the most of the Flamekeeper? Because I remember when I very first read the Flamekeeper, it sounded like a unit that sounded great on table, but I'm like, because you've got so many debuffs and not the debuffs, but like you've got so much durability in Fyreslayers, getting the value out of hitting the 6 dead models essentially within the Flamekeeper's bubble, outside of like having two bubbles kind of, reaping the rewards from 1 unit. Is that kind of what you're doing here? Or how do you make the most of the Flamekeeper? I find it a really interesting because you've got 2 wound models and they're very expensive and there's a lot of durability in your faction.
So typically you're doing both Flamekeepers are usually, not always, but typically running together. And the 12-inch increase is they have to be wholly within 12 inches to give the buff. But to get the increase, and it's only 5 models have to die because it starts on 1 and needs to go to 6.
Sure. Yeah.
So you'd have to just be within 12 for that. So you lightly tag the back of your unit, basically. Let that unit die. You can even put it outside ward range intentionally. Let it do damage, let it die, or get lowered, and then now you can buff up another unit. Or you put it in a position where your opponent has to put their hammers into your Volkites. And the Volkites only have a 5-up save. Don't even all-out defense. Let them hit those Volkites. Let them do damage. Fight on death with the Volkites, and you're going to... they have to kill the Volkites, right? And you're going to get the Flamekeepers up. And you can start getting this recurring thing where the very first time the Flamekeepers get up, you start throwing different Volkite units into combat and just they stay up permanently, basically. So you have to really massage the battlefield to get that going, though. And it is a tricky list to run because of that. And it definitely takes practice and reps with the list to get used to using those ranges and using the Flamekeepers to their most effective they can be. A fun thing with Flamekeepers is they're not bad for a foot hero in combat. I mean, they're like the typical 4 attacks, 3/3, -1/2 damage swings. But if you give them rune buffs, they can be -2 2 damage or even -3 2 damage swings. So you can sometimes opponents, you can kind of bait them into the Flamekeeper and then have them kill weak things like harpies or something like that. So the Flamekeepers are good. It's just about making best use of them, and that just takes reps. So
am I going crazy? Did you have a 4+ rally, or am I just not seeing it?
That's on the BattleSmith.
I'm going through this book and going, you've got a 4+ rally. I'm like, where is it? Where is it? I'm struggling looking through your enhancements. I'm like, surely it's a command trait. No, it's
on the BattleSmith. And since he's a totem, it's an 18-inch range. So it's separate from the Flamekeepers. So you can play more aggressive with the Flamekeepers, keep the BattleSmith back. Start doing that thing like I was talking about earlier where like there's 2 Volkites left. You pull them out, you rally them up, charge them back in next turn, that kind of thing. And the BattleSmith becomes a focal point for your opponents to try to remove because of that instead of the Flamekeepers, but the Flamekeepers are giving the damage buff. So it becomes like, once again, a decision-making point for your opponent on what he needs to kill. Or they need to.
I knew there was something there because I'm like, without the 4+ rally, like the Auric Flamekeeper, I'm like, I mean, you're rallying on 6s, like, so what? It's not like you're running these big blocks of 20s and 30s constantly. But when you start putting in that 4+ rally through the BattleSmith, in addition to the Flamekeeper bubbles, that's when you really start to supercharge that strategy.
Yeah, and sometimes I've run like 20 blocks of Volkite axes, especially in the previous GHB when they could fight through each other, because then you get more out of the Flamekeepers and the BattleSmith. And a nice thing about the Flamekeepers is they can affect Hearthguard. I don't have any in this list, but that can give the Broadaxe Hearthguard Berserkers 3 or 4 damage swings. So, I mean, that's something to consider. But this list is all about just pushing your castle forward, using the Runefather and the Skywardens as sort of free agents to go around and pick up the slack. The Runefather has his +1 attack buff, so you can bring him back in, give a Volkite unit 4 attack swings, possibly 5 depending on the runes, and you can really like swing for the rafters on things. So that's kind of how this list works. It's all about like pushing slowly on your opponents. And the Rune Smiter can deep strike a Volkite unit too, so that's not bad to do.
No, it's great. That's good. Would you change your with the emerging meta right now? And we talked earlier about the fact that there's Soulblight, there's Slaanesh, there's Khorne, there's Seraphon, there's all these armies like at the top of the meta. Do you think this list handles them well, or do you think for your next tournament this would change slightly based off a certain unit maybe not pulling its weight, or maybe something that you need now to handle this ever merging in meta?
I feel that this list plays extremely well in the Soulblight because typically you can, through buffs, get enough to kill Zombie Lord if they're running that on Zombie Dragon. And then zombies aren't really an issue because you're going to pick up almost all the zombies in one combat. Even with unbuffed Berserk Volkite Firesteel Hand Axes, you're going to pick up a lot of zombies. And if they die and kill some of your Volkites, fantastic. Now your Flamekeepers are getting buffed up, and you're really going to kill some stuff next time. And they're typically not killing a whole 10-man group of hand axes with one 40-man of zombie, because on average, even a 60 block of zombies is 20 mortal wounds. You typically have a 5 or 6 up ward, so they're going to be doing like 15 to 18 mortal wounds on average. So then you can rally them back up and buff them back up. So it's not a big problem with Soulblight. It's OBR that becomes an issue because they can stack so much saves and you don't have a ton of mortal wound output except for the Rune of Searing Heat. You end up playing this game of objective control and making them have to basically play whack-a-mole with your Volkites, and it becomes really tedious and it's really difficult. Your only real hammer that can deal with them is a buffed up Runefather, and he's just not enough typically. So OBR is a real problem for this list. Slaanesh is hit or miss. They can burn through your Volkites fairly quick, but they're going to be buffing you up because of it. And if you get some good charge rolls off, even with their Unleash Hell, it only takes 2 or 3 Volkites being left alive with 3 damage swings to pick up a Blissbarb unit. So it's kind of one of those things where but I would say with Slaanesh, it's not an auto lose or an auto win, but I think they have you're slightly favoring them, but not significantly. The Molten Infernoth can help things along, and the Skywardens, and then the Runefather's speed, and then the Master Rune means that you can throw your Runefather out there, asks to be targeted, and he can pop the 3-up ward and live for a turn. So it's these kind of things that make it not as bad, but OBR is a real problem for this list.
What about the other big bad corn?
That's really another break even. It also depends on the corn list. I've seen multiple different corn lists. The one that is very much a control list of corn I've seen, which is mostly infantry backed by priests. They're tanky. They're not trying to kill you. They're just trying to hold objectives and pull you out of your auras. That one's problematic. The one that's just like, I'm going to take the fight to you corn list, which I've seen, which is usually Bloodthirster heavy.
Like Double Thirster and Scarbrand or something.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Because if Scarbrand comes in and wipes out your Volkites, he's going to take damage from them dying, and then you're going to kill Scarbrand. Yeah. Then you're going to kill the other Bloodthirsters. If the Runefather gets in on a Bloodthirster, that Bloodthirster's dead. Like, you don't really stress it too hard. And a Bloodthirster's not killing the Runefather with his Master Rune. So it's not, and the one they can get the Bloodthirster ignores wards, but you still have Coldheart Ancient reducing damage, and you're still bleeding your Lava Blood back. So I don't find that corn is particularly an issue. That particular corn list is an issue for this. It's mostly the control corn that's like kind of manipulating the battlefield that becomes a problem.
So then because what I'm hearing from you is that a lot of these armies, like, you feel like you're in with a chance. Like, it's not like it's an auto loss. You've got some tools and some things. So why do you think they've got such a low win percentage right now? Like, they're at middle to bottom of, they're not at the bottom, but they're definitely not punching above the 3-2 kind of mark.
I think that there's a few things in play. First off, like I said, it does struggle heavily into OBR, and OBR is very ubiquitous. So you're seeing a lot of OBR. It's probably the hardest thing for Fyreslayers to fight. It's a big problem. Another thing is this list and a few others people have run, like the next one we'll see, are difficult to run. So if you're not putting in a lot of reps, you're not. If you're a newer Fyreslayers player, this isn't like picking up, Iron Jaws or something like that, where, like, yes, there's a lot of minutiae to it, and you can play at a high level. But at the surface level, you're picking it up. You can win. You can win a game if your opponent just makes a mistake. With this, it's really hard to capitalize on opponent mistakes. Instead, it's about you not making mistakes, and it's choosing the runes at the right time, choosing when to use your Runefather buff at the right time, when to use your Flamekeepers, how to use them. All these abilities are once per game, and if you mess even one of those abilities up, that could be the game for you. You could just lose it off that. In fact, I lost a game recently just because I used my Runefather's +1 attack at the right or wrong time. And if I just used it next round, I think I would have won the game. So those are, like, a lot of the Fyreslayers games exist on a knife's edge with that. And then the other issue is I think that a lot of Fyreslayers players just want to run big stompy Magmadroths, like 4 of them, and that's not great in the meta. And more power to them. I hope they win every game they play, but it's not necessarily going to do the greatest. So
no, not at the moment. No, thank you for that. Like, it's good to hear, because it sounds like you've got some tools, and it goes back to things that I say all this time on the channel. People who listen to me constantly, it's less about the list, and it's why lists are at the end of my discussions, because it's not about the list. It's about the micro decisions that you make throughout the game. It's how I choose what rune at what time. It's, who do I activate first? It's all these little micro decisions that make up a top performer, as opposed to, I built this, hard as nails list, and it is going to win me a tournament because it's just so overpowered and so overcooked. That doesn't mean that there's some lists out there, but it's the work that you put in.
And typically the lists you see that might be overcooked are the ones that a player could pick up and just go 3-2 or 4-1 without ever having a rep with it. Fyreslayers lists aren't really that. They're not good enough where you're doing that, but they're not bad either. They're just, you have to make these hard decisions, and if you mess one up, you could lose the game. So you need to get the reps in. So if someone picks up this list, I would say play 3 or 4 games with it. See how you feel about it. Think about how it played, where maybe you used a rune at a wrong time, or you threw your Skywardens away when you shouldn't have. Like that kind of thing. Think about these things, and maybe next time you play, you crush your opponent. You just did everything right that time. So it's really I feel like almost every Fyreslayers game, even if it's against a mid or low meta army, is always close. It's always about those decisions. And, like, I rarely run away with it. I rarely get crushed. It's always like that exists on a knife's edge every game. The only time Go on.
I was just saying that's exactly the type of game you want. You don't want to blow your opponent out by two turns. You don't want to lose by two, in the first 2 battle rounds. Like it is a game that's going to take you through to probably the round 4 and round 5.
Yeah, I think of my NashCon, since that's the most recent tournament, 4 of my 5 games went to round 4 or 5. Like literally my last game against a great opponent playing Soulblight, we were on round 5, and if he did something, we got a draw, and he failed to do a tactic, and I won by 2. It was that close. Against the Gargants game, like if he just rolled better, because I messed up my positioning, and he just, instead of picking up a unit, he just hit him with a pool noodle and like didn't do enough, and like that whole rest of the game become close there, and I ended up taking that game close. The only game I ran away with was the Lumineth one. I was playing a very feast or famine type Fyreslayers list. It's an abnormal one, and that one I tabled him in round 2, but that was a very strange list, and it was very niche. So that's the kind of thing. Typically, the lists you run very close games of Fyreslayers.
Yeah, yeah. It's super rare that you see them kind of blow out or, end really quickly. The other list, by the way, I assume there's nothing else you want to mention with your the previous list?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'll let you acknowledge and say where you got the list from and why you've pulled this list. But it's an absolute dog's breakfast, not in a good way. There's a lot of like meaty goodness in this. Like there's 2 Flamekeepers, a Rune Father with the Axe of Grimnir, Rune Master. Like you can read the screen. There's a lot going on here, folks. Sorry, podcast people, come over to YouTube and actually look at the list. Or who wrote it?
It was Noah Aquino. I hope I pronounced his name right. Noah Aquino. I've never met him. I'm assuming he's a great dude. But runs Fyreslayers. I'm sure he's a top bloke. And I chose this list because A, he did very well with it, and B, it's a list I personally would never run. And I like seeing lists that I wouldn't run do well. Something different, something that like I get to really look at and go, oh, I wonder, like, that's an interesting list. And funny enough, I had run a list that ended up being similar to this, just on I'd done like a dumb poll thing, and like people chose a list that I'd just thrown together randomly, and it being similar. And seeing him do so well with that list really was like made me think more about how the Fyreslayers are slotting into the meta. And I think it's a great list, and it's different than my style list, so it's good for other people to see that there is more to Fyreslayers than like the Volkite spam. And in this case, he's running all foot heroes with the new Grimhold Exile. And like we discussed earlier, the Grimhold Exile adds speed that typically you need a Magmadroth for. You don't need the Magmadroth if you have the Grimhold Exile to give a whole block of units run and charge. Even if it's only once per game, that's all you need typically. Once again, we also go back to the decision-making part where using that at the right time can make or break a game. And then he's got the unit of Sling Shield Berserkers. That's the tankier Volkite Berserkers. 2 units of Hand Axe Volkite Berserkers. Those are the damagey Berserkers. And then 2 units of Hearthguard Berserkers. Those are if the hero is wholly within 9 inches of them, they're wholly within 9 inches of a hero, they get a 4 ward. So they're pretty tanky. He's got 1 with Broad Axes. They have -1 rend, 2 damage swings, and 1 with Flame Strike Pull Axes, which do 2 mortal wounds in addition on 6s to hit. So what this means is that he's got mortal wound output from the Hearthguard Berserkers with Pull Axes, and rend with damage output from the Hearthguard Berserkers with Broad Axes. So the Broad Axes can deal with things like zombies or like Gits, while the Pull Axes can deal with things like a Ethereal Dragon or like a Immortus Guard, especially with Strike First, because you don't care about +1 to hit because you do mortal wounds. And then he's got 1 Grimwrath Berserker, which kind of acts like the Rune Father in the previous list. He's that hammer that can kind of run around the map and just pick something up with the Draft of Magmal Nail, which is the double Zir tax.
I was literally pulling that up. I'm like, what is it? Oh, that's right. It's the double the attacks once per battle
game.
artifact.
And another once per game thing. So again, when do you use that? And then the hardest part of this list is he's took the Masters of the Forge. He's only got one Invocation Runic Firewall. But just in case they Alpha Strike his Rune Master or he needs another one up, he has the command trait Avatar Volcatrix. So if his Rune Master dies, it turns into a Molten Infernoth. A Molten Infernoth spawns off of the Rune Master dying. So he can hopefully secure his grand strategy by just that Rune Master dying. And you don't have to move a Molten Infernoth because it's a May ability, or can, I believe. So you can just let it sit on the battlefield to get your grand strategy if he dies. So that's an interesting little tech piece, is get your firewall. You only have the one invocation with the one priest, but you can still secure it if they die with the Avatar Volcatrix. It is a big sacrifice not getting Master Priest, which lets you use one rune twice, but it's still very useful. So, that was the other thing I forgot in the previous list. The command trait Master Priest lets you use one rune twice on the Rune Master, so you can use your Rend rune for 2 times in the game, or your Mortal Wound rune 2 times, like if you're in the Night Haunt or something.
Yeah.
So that it's not getting that on the Rune Master is a big sacrifice for the Avatar, but it's very interesting. And so this list ends up functioning kind of, it's on paper it seems similar to the previous list, but it actually ends up functioning very differently, where you have the block that's with the Rune Father and the Grimhold Exile and the Hearthguard Berserkers can act on their own. The Grimwrath Berserker can be given that Oath of Run and Charge to get where he needs to be, slip through a crack, hit someone hard. He's still got the Flamekeepers, but now they can buff Hearthguard Berserkers. They can give them that charge in the combat phase. You can screen your Berserkers with your your Hearthguard Berserkers with your Volkite Berserkers. So there's all these little tricks in this list, and all these once per game things, and it becomes this very hard nut to crack for your opponents.
And it's interesting because we've talked a lot about not caring about deployment, but here we are with a double battle reg as well. Yeah. So it's fascinating, right? Because is he going second and wants to go for the double between 1 and 2? Is there something that you just want to be able to take that option off your opponent? Because a lot of people are going Antorian Acolytes if it's available to their army. So whether they're going 1 drop purely for battle reg, so you lose that, or you're going 3 drops at minimum with the Antorian Acolyte Battalion, so you would defeat them there. There's some definitely interesting list tech here, and it feels very much like an onion, right? There's just multiple layers and multiple win conditions.
And with Greyfyrd, when you get the +2 artifacts, I think that was the idea behind Greyfyrd instead of Vostarg was, I already get 3 artifacts. Let's get the double battle reg, beat the people off the line who are getting those 3 drops or 4 drops. Get to go second, which is very rare for Fyreslayers, or first if you want to deny your opponent certain things. And it gives you a little bit more options that you didn't previously have, just another decision point for yourself to make about who goes first. And I think that's good. I think this list plays well into it because it doesn't need the 2 other artifacts. Like, my list really ran off as Vostarg wanting Warlord, right? This list doesn't really need it. It's happy to not have those 2 additional artifacts from double Warlords. So you can go battle reg, and maybe that can be a big deal into like something like a Seraphon that is running those Andorian Acolytes Battalion. So, this list is definitely a more complex one there's lots of moving parts here, lots of once per game abilities, lots of considerations with how it's run. And I think that it's a great example of how you can have something very different from the Vostarg list or a Magmadroth list that looks on paper like it's similar, but ends up running very differently. So it's an interesting list, and I think it's worth a shot for especially people who love Hearthguard Berserkers to run. So
I think between your list and this list, it proves that there is no one list to rule them all. Like, you have multiple different options, build around what, makes you happy and what you enjoy. And there are competitive builds throughout the book. And I'm sure there's plenty more that we haven't really spoken about, but it just shows you, again, there's no one way to do this army, despite...
Neither of these lists have Auric Hearthguard, and both of them take Flamekeepers, but you don't have to do that. And I think the Fyreslayers book has very good internal balance, where there is a lot of lists you can run that are good. So if you like stuff in the book, chances are there is a list that you can run with it. If you like Grimwrath Berserkers, there's a Grimwrath Berserker spam list. It's great. So it's all about finding what you like and getting reps in with it.
All I'll say is give me more Doomseekers, please. That's what I want to see. More Doomseekers. There's a mad lad down my way, Joel, who I think he ran 6 4 or 6 Doomseekers in a list. I'm pretty sure it was either Doomseekers or Grimwrath Berserkers. I remember at one particular tournament. It's like, what are you doing? But
I've seen it with Grimwrath. Doomseekers is good. That would be a nightmare of tracking, because the Doomseekers thing is when you run a Doomseeker, you have to select their unit that they want to like meet their doom to, and every Doomseeker would be selecting a different unit, right? So you're like, or maybe they all just select the same. They're like, yeah, we all want to get RK on. Me and the bros are gonna go kill them.
It's just
Like,
the bunch of missiles you're just shooting across the board. And like they're cheap, 85 points. Sorry, that's just
they're ridiculous. 80 now. But yeah, the Doomseekers are fun. I like Doomseekers, and if you have 80 points, they're fun to throw in. And once again, that gives you that new battalion, the Wizard Finder, because you could just make him the head of it, and then put your Hearthguard Berserkers or your Volkites in the Wizard Finder battalion with him. So he's fun.
Despite the limited amount of units you have available to you, there's so much list choice out there, which is neat. And it kind of leads me to maybe a couple of last questions before I let you go. I know you had a party out the back after Dragon Con. Shout out to everyone who was at the convention and is probably watching you on the big screen, listening with bated breath. So, and shout out to the missus for the delicious milkshake that you got brought in as well.
Yeah. I don't know what they're doing now. They're oddly quiet. I'm getting worried, but we'll see. Maybe they all shuffled out. So I live right near bars, so they might have gone to a different one. So
well, you can join them in a minute, I swear. Couple of last questions from Discord that I do want to ask. We've already acknowledged a bunch of them. So we had some questions coming in around your thoughts on the battle tactics. They asked you around the thoughts of the point increases and the Grimhold Exile. So there are plenty of discussion so far. Maybe the 2 questions we haven't completely acknowledged just yet, and I hope one of them makes sense to you, because it certainly doesn't make any sense to me. One coming around what allies are good for us. So we've already acknowledged some of the Sky Wardens. We've talked about some of the Gyrocopter, Gyro Bombers potentially. You do have Cities, KO, and Stormcast as your ally choices. Any other hot picks or any considerations?
The current Rune Lord is very good, obviously, with the +2 Unbind. And he can also pray for Fyreslayers' prayers. So that's very nice. But
I just want to underline. That was what I was doing. I was underlining the word current. So if you don't own a Rune Lord currently, they're losing the +2 to Unbind and Dispel as per the New Cities book. So run it while you can. Any other choices?
From Stormcast, you have the Knight Incantor, which is solid. He brings you a wizard, so you can get that Mystic Shield. He has the auto Unbind, which is very nice. The downside is you do lose your Nullstone icon or your pouch of Null Dust, but sometimes you don't mind that trade-off. Maybe your meta has a lot of corn or something like that, where you're like, I don't really care about not getting those. I do want Mystic Shield. So, or I want that auto Unbind to just completely ruin some caster's day for getting rid of that key spell. They also have the Lord Relictor, which has an innate +1 to chanting rolls, and he can also pray for Fyreslayers' prayers because they're not keyword locked. Fyreslayers' invocations do not keyword lock to Fyreslayers. So any priest can pray for them, as long as they're allied in, obviously. So
if you brought in the Rune Lord, you could chant those prayers.
Correct. You would not get the benefit of the Forge giving +1 to chanting, but you could still do it. But the Lord Relictor has +1 chanting on his War Scroll, which is also not keyword locked. It's just him. So you could pray for the Fyreslayers' prayers with him, and he's a tanky priest that has some good stuff on his War Scroll. He's a little bit expensive, but he's a solid ally. So
okay. I mean, you're buying him for the +1 to his chanting because you can't use Translocate or any other. That's the reason Stormcast players take him for Translocate.
But he's just a beefy wizard, which is nice too. Our beefy priest. Yeah, and then the final one, which I've seen some. I mean, we went over the Gunhauler and Skywardens, but ally choice I seldom see, but I've seen it more than some others. Is the dragons from Stormcast, and that's because they add another speedy thing that's kind of like they kind of fill the same slot as a Rune Sun on Magmadroth, but they're a little bit tankier innately. So perhaps you've already given a Rune Sun on Magmadroth the Master Rune, and you're worried about how much tank your unit has. You run 2 of them. They have the same wounds characteristic, but split between 2 units. And then they have a 3-up save instead of 4-up. so you can kind of run them, and they have a decent shooting attack. So they're a nice little like utility piece that kind of adds, as you can kind of run them away from your castle, run them maybe off to the edge or something like that. They can add another utility that I think is pretty solid for their points. So I've seen some people use those.
And I'm sure there's going to be a few things coming out of City's book now that we've got the new book. I'm sure some people might play around with the Fusiliers, or they might play around with the Cavaliers, or maybe they want to bring in some Flagellants for some cheap screens, or there's going to be a bunch of options as well coming out of that book.
I haven't really delved too hard into the new City stuff yet because it's not out. I'm like not really worried about it yet, but when it comes out, yeah, there may be some really. I do think the like cavalry or something like that could be quite nice for their points. And I mean, they also now would have 150 point priest in the Pope that you could bring in. I don't know if you'd bring him in, but hey, maybe just get the Pope in there for
That's
fun.
Too expensive. That's a very expensive Pope with little no benefit. One other question before I ask you, like my final question, is Mitch asked me explain rock bolts so more people get it. With a laugh emoji. So I hope this makes sense.
So Orc Hearthguard, which are the unit, they're the shooty Fyreslayer unit. They have an 18-inch range. On 6s to hit, they reduce a unit's movement by 1 inch until the end of their next movement phase. So, but it's to a minimum of half. So let's say I roll 5 6s and I reduce that unit's movement by 5 inches to a minimum of half the move characteristic till the next movement phase, end of the next movement phase, their next movement phase. It's weird to think about. So if they have like a 6-inch move, you would make it 6 minus 5, but minimum of 3 inches, right? But what if they run? So you've added 2 modifiers. So their 6-inch move, let's say they run 6 inches. That's 12 inch minus 5 is 7 inches. So you start doing all this math with it and it gets confusing. The really confusing part is a lot of people have argued that, let's say you would, that the Molten Rock Bolt should be applied first. So you would lower the 6 inches to 3, right? Then add the 6 from the run to get 9. But there's generally modifiers we've done have always been like you add up all the modifiers at once and then put the cap on after.
No, but you're impacting the movement characteristic. So run doesn't change the movement characteristic.
Yeah, so it just adds a modifier to it. So so you just take off the run base. Basically, you have 2 characteristics both trying to modify your run, so they just cancel each other out basically. It's complex. You get to do math. Fyreslayers
people next week at my GT, do not come to me about this question, please. Do not ask me that.
Despite say, just take it. If someone's running with it, just add up the run, add up the rock bolts, take it together, then check against half of the movement characteristic. Is it less than that? Then just put it to half. If it's more, don't do anything else. You're good. Molten Rock Bolt's a niche thing, but you'll see it come up here and there.
I want to check the tapes on that one. I want to check the tapes on that before we make that final ruling. This is not.
Yeah. Go read your Discord here. There was a big discussion about it in the rules chat.
I don't. No offense, but I don't trust a Fyreslayers player being like neutral on a Fyreslayers ruling. So check the tapes on that one. And if in doubt, ask your TO.
Yeah,
Kevin,
that's always the go-to.
This has been awesome. One final question, and you can wrap us up, is if you got a chance to add something to the next book, whether it's through Dawnbringers or something new, Battle Tome, what do you want? What do you want to see? Do you want to see this combination Duarden book where you see Fyreslayers KO and a Big War equivalent? Do you want a new unit? What do you want to see in a next Fyreslayers?
To two-part that, I don't want to see the soup book unless it's with a Legion of the White Dwarf and we get like the White Dwarf coming in like supplement where he like gathers all the Dwarden. That might be fun. We could get Grombrindle as like the dwarf version of Bellicor. That would be fun. But no, I'd love to see. I want to see a new fast unit that's very different, and so I personally would love to see either a chariot with like mini droths or Valkyries with like flame wings or something. Some female Fyreslayers with like flame wing Valkyries would be dope. That would be really cool. It would add something new to the army. It adds something people want. I've heard a lot of people want female Fyreslayers. So it would add that. It would be a cool unit. It would be something that Fyreslayers don't have, which is like a quick infantry. So I think that would be something I'd want. It's just like Flamewing Valkyrie. There we go. Let's do it. So
nothing I could say I think could beat that. I think that is a sweet recommendation. Like low-hanging fruit for me has always been give me unridden Magmadroths. Let me have some feral wild version that is, just I don't want to have a person on a chair on every single Magmadroth.
Yeah,
Let me have some
no,
monsters,
I wanted a Megadroth. They made the skeleton for a Megadroth or Gigadroth, the terrain piece.
Yeah.
Make a living one and put it in Fyreslayers. It'd be a behemoth, like a big one on like a Maw Crusher sized base or something. Like that would be really dope. So that's one of my. Yeah.
I would love to see some light cavalry. I love that Valkyrie idea. I love this. Like I remember back in the old, dwarf days of the Warhammer, the world that was, you had Helga. Helga was the queen of the dwarves.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's that niche that, you could do like Valkyries, you could do something unique. But one, give me some female dwarves. Two, love the idea of flame wings and flame everything. Give me flames everywhere.
And in the lore for the Fyreslayers, there's lots of female Fyreslayers. I mean, one of the lodges is led by a rune matron. Maybe give us one of the very first named Fyreslayers could be the rune matron, like leading like her Flamewing Valkyries. That would be dope. So GW, these ones are free. Come on now, it's money.
Right. Shut up, take my money. I'm gonna let's get this happening. Kev, this has been awesome. I appreciate your thoughts. I miss Momo the cat. Disappeared, but
she got locked out.
Aw. Any shout outs I know you got your Georgia people you want to give some love to. Any shout outs, and then we're gonna wrap this up.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to my friend Eric. He's currently in the ICU. He's had some health issues. So we're doing a big charity tournament for him in a couple weeks here. He's hanging in there. He's pulling through. So we did at NashCon, we had he plays Gargants. So we had a big Gargant with his head on it and stuff. So that's my shout outs to my friend Eric.
That's awesome. And if people wanted to know that tournament, where is the tournament? How can they get involved?
It's going to be at Gigabytes Cafe in Northern Georgia. It's in the Atlanta Metro, Marietta. And you can go on to the Georgia Warband Discord, and we can give you all the links. You can message me and the AOS coach if you want to see it, if you want to get more info on it, and I'm glad to give it. So Team Eric, and we can, if you want to come do the charity tournament, feel free. We'll have giveaways and raffles.
Amazing. And if you want to get involved, like message Kevin. Kevin is in my Discord. Your handle is?
It's Kuhal. Kuhal.
And I'll put it in the video description as well. We won't put the link to the Discord just because of bots and just don't want to they're a pain in the backside. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I enjoy your additional thoughts on Fyreslayers. It sounds like there's a lot of cool things that we were doing last season that are still true to this day. But obviously with the new General's Handbook, Antorian Locuses, the shifts in the meta with, particular factions, there are new things to play around with that. I hope we have unpacked this a little bit to lift that win rate, to get people a little bit excited to play Fyreslayers. My tournament next week, 100-odd players, only 2 Fyreslayers players. I hope we start to see this lifting as you get to LVO and some of the bigger tournaments. You coming to LVO, and are you bringing Fyreslayers? Putting on the spot.
Yeah, actually, I already bought my ticket, and I'll be there. I went last year. I'll be going this coming year.
Slayers?
Yep. Planning to. So
I'll see you there. I'll see you there.
Yeah, I'll see you there, Coach.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, people. I hope you enjoyed it. Comment, leave this discussion. You know what to do. Let us know what you're thinking. And was there some things that maybe you're finding from the current season that you would recommend to a Fyreslayers player? Maybe you are a big fan of a particular thing like the Underworld's Warband we didn't really talk about. Maybe some secret list tech in there. Let us know in the comments. But Kevin, thank you so much for your time. Go give Mumu a nice little head scratch and a pat for me. And thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you press like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a double one on a spellcast.